Picture a sight that defies everything we know about the world. A holy man, seated in deep meditation, begins to slowly rise from the ground, hovering effortlessly in the air as if gravity itself has lost its grip. Or imagine the builders of a massive, ancient temple moving stones that weigh more than elephants, not with ropes and pulleys, but seemingly by sound alone, guiding them through the air to their perfect place. These aren't scenes from a fantasy movie. These are the incredible accounts passed down through centuries, whispered in sacred texts and carved into the walls of forgotten ruins. They speak of a power that seems to belong to the realm of gods and magic, the ancient art of levitation. And it forces us to ask a question that has haunted historians and scientists for generations. Were these stories just symbolic myths, beautiful metaphors for spiritual ascent? Or were they describing a real, tangible science, a lost technology that allowed humanity to manipulate the very forces of nature in ways we can scarcely comprehend today? This is the profound mystery we are going to explore together. The idea that our ancestors might have unlocked secrets of the physical world that we are only now beginning to rediscover is both thrilling and deeply unsettling. It challenges the very timeline of human progress we hold so dear. We will journey across time and continents, from the high Himalayas where ancient manuscripts describe monks achieving weightlessness through intense mental discipline, to the plains of Peru, where the mind-bogglingly precise stonework of sites like Sacsayhuaman stands as a silent, monumental puzzle. We will delve into the writings of Greek philosophers and early Christian mystics, all of whom recorded witnessing feats that should have been impossible. Each of these threads forms part of a tapestry that is far more complex and intriguing than a simple fairy tale. So join me on an investigation into one of history's most captivating enigmas. We will weigh the anecdotal evidence against the hard laws of physics, hearing from modern scientists who are experimenting with acoustic and magnetic levitation, creating in labs what was once only described in legend. We will separate the plausible from the fantastical, the evidence from the embellishment. This is a journey to the very edge of what we think is possible, a quest to understand if the greatest magic trick in human history was, in fact, not magic at all, but a forgotten chapter in the story of our own ingenuity. Let's begin. To truly grasp the mystery we're exploring, we need to first understand what we're actually talking about, because levitation in this ancient context is far more than a simple magic trick. When we see a magician suspend an assistant on stage, we know it's an illusion, a clever use of wires and mirrors designed to entertain. The levitation described in ancient texts and oral traditions is something else entirely. It's presented not as deception, but as a genuine manipulation of physical reality, an ability to counteract the force of gravity itself, often with profound spiritual or practical purpose. This core idea manifests in several distinct forms, each with its own fascinating implications. First, there's the concept of psychokinetic levitation, the power of the mind alone to influence matter. This is the image of the meditating monk or saint, achieving such a profound state of mental focus and inner peace that their physical form becomes unburdened, lifting from the ground as a direct result of their spiritual attainment. It suggests a deep, untapped connection between consciousness and the physical world. Then we have the theories rooted in more tangible, though still mysterious, physical principles. Acoustic levitation, for instance, is a phenomenon that modern science has actually begun to replicate in laboratories. The idea is that specific, powerful sound waves at the right frequency and amplitude can create standing waves in the air. In these waves, there are points of high pressure and low pressure, and an object can be trapped and suspended in one of these stable points, seemingly floating on a cushion of invisible energy. This theory is often invoked to explain some of the most baffling architectural feats of antiquity, like the placement of massive stone blocks in ancient temples, where legends speak of priests using chants or specific instruments to make the stones move through the air. Moving into even more speculative realms, we encounter electromagnetic and anti-gravity theories. These propose that ancient civilizations might have discovered a way to manipulate the Earth's magnetic field or somehow create a localized counterforce to gravity, perhaps using crystals, unique geological formations, or technologies now lost to time. The sheer diversity of these explanations, from the deeply spiritual to the vibrantly physical, is a huge part of what makes this topic so compelling and persistent. It's not one single shaky story, but a chorus of accounts from wildly different cultures, all pointing toward a similar, impossible reality. This persistence across time and geography suggests we are dealing with something more than mere fantasy. We are confronting a fundamental, recurring human experience that challenges the very foundations of our understanding. Now, let's ground these incredible concepts in something we can actually see and touch: the colossal stone monuments left behind by ancient cultures. These aren't just ruins, they are a direct challenge carved in immovable rock to our understanding of history. Consider the monumental platform at Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon. Here, resting in a quarry nearly a mile away from the main temple complex, lies the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. This single block of limestone is estimated to weigh over 1,000 tons. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the weight of 2 fully loaded Boeing 747 jumbo jets. The sheer scale is staggering, but the mystery deepens when you realize this block was somehow cut from the bedrock, moved across uneven ground, and then lifted over 20 feet to be placed in a wall alongside 2 other blocks of similar, almost unimaginable mass. The conventional explanation of ropes, log rollers, and thousands of workers strains against the limits of physics and practicality. Moving such a weight, let alone positioning it with pinpoint accuracy, seems an almost superhuman task with the tools we traditionally attribute to these builders. This puzzle is echoed on the other side of the world, high in the Andes Mountains of Peru at the fortress of Sacsayhuaman. Here, the walls are constructed from enormous, irregularly shaped stones, some weighing well over 100 tons. Yet these giant blocks are fitted together with a precision that defies belief. The joints between them are so tight that, centuries later, you cannot slide a single piece of paper between the stones. The faces of these granite blocks are not flat. They are complex, three-dimensional puzzles with concave surfaces matching convex ones and interlocking corners that look more like a piece of modern, computer-designed architecture than hand-chiseled stonework. The work is so meticulous that it appears the builders were able to soften the stone or mold it like clay, creating these perfect, seamless fits. The local Inca legends themselves offer a tantalizing clue. They speak of the stones being softened with a mysterious plant extract and then put into place, but even this doesn't fully explain the transportation and the lifting of such massive material across the rugged mountain terrain. So we are left with a monumental question that archaeologists and engineers have wrestled with for generations. How was this truly accomplished? The standard theories are compelling but incomplete. We imagine vast armies of laborers using inclined planes, levers, and sheer brute force. Yet, when you stand before these walls, the logistical challenges become overwhelming. How do you coordinate thousands of people to move a 1,000-ton block without modern communication? How do you transport it over miles without crushing the log rollers beneath it? And most bafflingly, how do you achieve such surgical precision in the final placement of these colossal, irregular stones? It is precisely at this point where conventional explanations begin to falter, that the idea of a lost technology like levitation emerges not as a fringe fantasy, but as a potential, though radical, solution. Could the builders of Baalbek and Sacsayhuaman have possessed a knowledge of acoustic resonance, using specific sound frequencies to cancel out the weight of the stones, allowing small teams to guide them effortlessly into place? Perhaps they had mastered principles of electromagnetism, using the Earth's own energy to negate gravity in a localized area. These ideas might sound like science fiction, but when faced with such physical marvels, they invite us to expand our thinking about what our ancestors were truly capable of achieving. But what if this lost science wasn't just about moving stones, but about moving entire vehicles through the air? For that, we must travel to ancient India and examine what is perhaps the most detailed and controversial collection of accounts describing advanced technology in the ancient world, the Vimanas. These are not vague whispers or ambiguous carvings. They are detailed, almost technical descriptions of flying machines found within epic Sanskrit texts like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, written thousands of years ago. The word Vimana itself literally translates to measuring out, traversing, and is often described as a celestial chariot of the gods, but the level of detail goes far beyond a simple poetic metaphor. The texts describe these craft as being constructed from specific metals like lead and copper, powered by mercury or other mysterious substances referred to as liquid fire, and capable of incredible feats of flight. They could hover motionless in the sky, execute sharp turns, ascend vertically, and travel vast distances between continents. Some accounts even describe them as multi-storied structures with portholes and domes, carrying passengers and powerful weapons. The descriptions of their capabilities are particularly startling. The Mahabharata, for instance, recounts a devastating war where Vimanas were used as weapons of mass destruction. It speaks of a single projectile, a single charge laden with the power of the universe, that produced an incandescent column of smoke and flame, brilliant as 10,000 suns. The aftermath is described in harrowing detail. Metal objects melted, corpses were burned beyond recognition, and those who survived later lost their hair and nails. To anyone familiar with the effects of a nuclear explosion, the parallels are chilling and deeply unsettling. Another text, the Samrangana Sutradhara, dedicates an entire chapter to the operation of these machines, discussing how they were propelled by heated engines and controlled by a pilot, detailing everything from the construction of their sturdy, shock-absorbing bodies to the precautions for long journeys. This reads less like a mythological fantasy and more like a technical manual. It was this incredible specificity that captured the imagination of authors like Erich von Däniken in the 1960s and 70s. In his controversial book, Chariots of the Gods, he proposed a radical interpretation. These Vimanas were not imaginary vehicles, but literal descriptions of advanced technology. He and other proponents of the ancient astronaut theory argued that these texts were evidence of extraterrestrial visitors who came to Earth in the distant past, and that the Vimanas were their spacecraft. To them, the descriptions of roaring engines, mercury vortex engines, and devastating weapons were proof that our ancestors were witnessing real, advanced technology, which they could only describe using the limited vocabulary available to them. This interpretation frames these ancient texts not as mythology, but as historical records of contact with a superior civilization. Mainstream scholarship, however, offers a very different and more grounded perspective. Historians and philologists who study these texts within their cultural and religious context view the Vimanas as powerful allegory. In this view, they are symbolic representations of spiritual power, divine sovereignty, and the journey of the soul. The ability to fly represents transcendence, the overcoming of earthly desires and attachments to achieve a higher state of consciousness. The elaborate descriptions of battles and weapons are seen as metaphors for the internal struggle between good and evil, dharma and adharma, within the human psyche. Scholars point out that these epics are fundamentally religious and philosophical works, and interpreting them as literal, technical documents strips them of their deeper symbolic meaning and cultural significance. They argue that the vivid language is a feature of the poetic tradition, designed to inspire awe and convey profound philosophical truths, not to document historical technology. So we are presented with two radically different ways of reading the same ancient words. One sees a literal record of lost science or otherworldly visitation, a puzzle that modern science is only beginning to piece together. The other sees a magnificent tapestry of spiritual and poetic imagination, a testament to the human capacity for storytelling and philosophical inquiry. This fundamental divide lies at the very heart of our exploration into ancient mysteries. The Vimana accounts force us to confront a critical question. Are we projecting our own modern, technological worldview onto ancient symbols, desperately seeking validation for our sci-fi dreams in the past? Or are we, perhaps, too quick to dismiss the literal interpretations because they challenge the comfortable, linear narrative of human history we have constructed? The truth, as always, may be far more complex and elusive than either extreme suggests. And of course, any deep dive into ancient architectural marvels must eventually bring us to the most iconic and debated structure on Earth, the Great Pyramid of Giza. For centuries, it has stood as the ultimate symbol of human achievement, and yet, the more we study it, the more it reveals a series of engineering puzzles that continue to baffle experts. We've all heard the conventional explanations: massive earthen ramps spiraling upwards, armies of workers toiling for decades, copper chisels and stone hammers. But when you scrutinize the details of the pyramid's construction, these standard theories begin to encounter some formidable obstacles. Let's consider the sheer scale of the project. We are talking about the precise placement of approximately 2.3 million individual limestone blocks. Each one of these stones had to be quarried, shaped, transported, and then set into place with breathtaking accuracy. Some of the core blocks weigh in at a staggering 80 tons, but the real head-scratchers are the granite beams found in the king's chamber. These immense slabs of red granite were quarried in Aswan, a distance of over 500 miles to the south. Now imagine the logistics of that single task. How do you transport multiple 70-ton blocks of solid granite down the Nile and across the desert? The conventional view suggests they were floated on barges during the annual flood. While this is plausible, the practical challenges are immense. Building a barge strong enough to carry such a weight without sinking, then navigating it upriver, and finally unloading it at the site presents a series of monumental hurdles. Then comes the construction of the pyramid itself. The internal chambers and passageways, particularly the Grand Gallery and the King's Chamber, are feats of engineering in their own right. The massive granite beams forming the chamber's roof are so precisely cut and fitted that their joints are virtually invisible. They were lifted over 150 feet into the heart of the structure and positioned with a level of precision that would be difficult to achieve even with modern cranes. The classic ramp theory struggles here as well. Building a ramp sturdy enough and at a shallow enough angle to drag an 80-ton block to such a height would have required a volume of material nearly as large as the pyramid itself, and there is simply no archaeological evidence for such a massive ramp system. It is precisely at this intersection of immense scale and surgical precision that alternative ideas like the theory of acoustic levitation find their footing. Proponents of this concept point to the long-held traditions in many cultures that speak of sound as a fundamental creative and shaping force. The idea is that the ancient builders might have discovered a way to harness specific sound frequencies to counteract gravity. Through the use of drums, chanting, or perhaps specially designed instruments, they could have generated a powerful standing wave. In this field of acoustic energy, an object can be suspended at the nodes between the sound waves, effectively floating. This wouldn't just make the stones weightless, it could potentially make them easier to manipulate and guide into their perfect positions. Imagine a team of workers not straining against ropes and levers, but instead using coordinated harmonics to gently nudge a multi-ton block into place with minimal physical effort. This could explain how they achieved such impossible precision with such immense weights. While this might sound like pure speculation, it's fascinating to note that modern science has begun to catch up with this ancient concept. Researchers today regularly use acoustic levitators in laboratories to suspend small objects, from water droplets to tiny pieces of wood, in mid-air using nothing but sound waves. The principle is proven, we know it works. The leap, of course, is in the scale. Could the ancient Egyptians, or a lost civilization before them, have mastered this principle to a degree that allowed them to levitate stones weighing tens of tons? We have no direct archaeological evidence, like an ancient tuning fork or a sonic blueprint, left behind. Yet, when the conventional methods seem to fall just short of fully explaining the reality of what was built, it forces us to keep an open mind. The Great Pyramid, in its silent, majestic grandeur, doesn't offer us easy answers. Instead, it presents a permanent question carved in stone, challenging every generation to reconsider what is possible. While we have been exploring the idea of physical bodies and massive stones defying gravity, there is another dimension to this ancient mystery, a form of elevation that is not of the body, but of the spirit and the mind. This brings us to one of the most famous and well-documented sacred sites of the ancient world, the oracle at Delphi in Greece. For over 1,000 years, this was the epicenter of the known world, a place where kings, generals, and common pilgrims alike traveled great distances to seek guidance from the Pythia, the priestess who served as the mouthpiece of the god Apollo. The core of this ritual was a profound alteration of consciousness. The Pythia would descend into a special chamber, sit upon a three-legged stool placed over a fissure in the limestone rock, and breathe in vapors said to rise from the earth, vapors believed to be the very breath of the god. In this state, she would enter a violent, ecstatic trance, her body convulsing, her voice becoming a guttural shriek. From this seemingly chaotic state, her mumbled utterances were interpreted by attending priests and transformed into the poetic, often cryptic, prophecies that shaped the course of Greek history. What's truly fascinating is that for centuries, this account was dismissed by modern scholars as pure myth or clever psychological manipulation. The idea of intoxicating vapors rising from a specific geological fault was considered a superstitious fabrication. That is, until a multidisciplinary team of archaeologists, geologists, and chemists decided to investigate the site with modern tools. Their findings, published in the early 2000s, were nothing short of revolutionary. They confirmed that the temple at Delphi was indeed built directly upon two intersecting geological fault lines, which created a pathway for gases and water to rise from deep within the earth. Even more stunningly, they found trace evidence of ethylene gas in the local spring waters. Ethylene is a simple hydrocarbon gas with a sweet smell, and it is a potent psychoactive agent. In low doses, it can induce a state of disorientation, euphoria, and altered consciousness symptoms that match ancient descriptions of the Pythia's trance with uncanny accuracy. It appears the ancient Greeks were not merely using poetic language, they were documenting a real, tangible, geological phenomenon that directly affected human neurology. This discovery opens up a profound new way of interpreting many ancient accounts of levitation and supernatural abilities. When we read in various mystical texts about holy men or sages rising into the air during deep meditation or prayer, we have always assumed this was meant to be taken literally. But what if, in at least some of these cases, the authors were describing a powerful, internal, spiritual experience using the best physical metaphors available to them? The sensation of an out-of-body experience, of the spirit soaring free from its earthly confines while in a profound trance state, could very easily be recounted by the individual or their followers as a literal physical ascent. The levitation of the spirit becomes recorded in history as the levitation of the body. This isn't to say that every account is a simple misunderstanding. Rather, it highlights the immense difficulty in separating the literal from the metaphorical in ancient records, especially when those records describe states of consciousness that defy ordinary language. The story of the oracle at Delphi, therefore, acts as a crucial bridge in our investigation. It demonstrates that the ancient world possessed a sophisticated, albeit intuitive, understanding of the powerful interplay between the physical environment and human consciousness. They knew that certain places on the earth held a unique power to open the mind to other realms of perception. This elevation was just as real and just as sought after as any physical feat. It forces us to consider that the quest to overcome gravity might have been a dual-path endeavor, one external, seeking to master the physical laws of the universe to move great stones or even vehicles, and the other internal, seeking to use ritual, discipline, or even naturally occurring substances to liberate the human spirit from its earthly bonds. The vapors at Delphi did not make the Pythia float in the air, but they certainly lifted her mind to a place where she could, according to her believers, commune with the divine. This nuanced perspective doesn't diminish the mystery. It deepens it, adding a rich layer of psychological and geological reality to the tapestry of ancient wonders, and reminding us that the line between a scientific phenomenon and a spiritual experience was often beautifully and intentionally blurred. From the prophecies of Delphi to the soaring vaults of Gothic cathedrals, the human quest to touch the divine has taken many forms, and perhaps none is as visually arresting as the accounts of levitating saints within Christianity. While we often associate these feats with Eastern mystics, some of the most meticulously recorded instances come from the heart of Catholic Europe, presenting a phenomenon that the Church itself approached with a mixture of awe, reverence, and deep-seated caution. Among the most famous of these figures is Saint Joseph of Cupertino, a 17th-century Franciscan friar who seemed to have a particularly difficult time keeping his feet on the ground. Historical records, including transcripts from his canonization process, document dozens of instances where he was witnessed to levitate, often in moments of intense prayer or spiritual ecstasy. These were not fleeting moments. Witnesses, including popes, cardinals, and fellow friars, swore under oath to seeing him rise from the ground and hover in the air, sometimes for extended periods, even flying across a chapel to land on the altar. On one notable occasion, he is said to have soared into the branches of an olive tree and remained there, kneeling on a branch too thin to support a bird for over half an hour in a state of rapture. These events were so frequent and so well attested by credible, often skeptical observers that they formed the central evidence for his sainthood. The Catholic Church's response to such phenomena is a critical part of this story, revealing an institution deeply concerned with distinguishing divine intervention from deception or delusion. The Church has a long and formalized process for investigating miracles, and claims of levitation were subjected to intense scrutiny. Investigators would interview witnesses, assess the individual's overall character and humility, and look for any potential signs of trickery. The official position was and remains one of extreme caution. While such events could be classified as gratiae gratis dei, to grace freely given, or divine gifts, they were never considered essential to holiness. In fact, the Church has always been more suspicious than credulous, warning that such extraordinary phenomena could just as easily be a source of pride for the individual or a distraction for the faithful from the more important inward journey of faith. The primary concern was always the person's charity and virtue, not their paranormal abilities. A supposed mystic who displayed arrogance or disobedience while claiming to levitate would be swiftly dismissed. This careful, almost clinical investigation by a powerful, centuries-old institution lends a unique layer of credibility to these accounts that is absent from many other historical anecdotes. To approach this from a modern perspective, we must also consider potential psychological and physiological explanations for what these witnesses were describing. The states associated with these levitations are almost always described as ecstasy or rapture, a complete absorption in communion with God that leads to a suspension of the senses. From a neurological standpoint, this shares similarities with certain dissociative or trance states. In such a condition, an individual's perception of their own body can be radically altered, potentially leading to powerful sensations of floating or flying. Furthermore, a related condition known as catalepsy could play a role. Catalepsy involves a sudden loss of voluntary motion and a rigidity of the body where limbs can remain in whatever position they are placed. Imagine a friar in a state of intense prayer who enters a cataleptic fit. If his body became rigid while kneeling and he then fell forward or was jostled by others, the sudden, stiff movement could be misinterpreted by awe-struck onlookers as a miraculous floating ascent. The human mind, especially in a highly charged religious environment, is predisposed to interpret ambiguous events through the lens of faith and expectation. So we are left with a compelling dilemma. On one hand, we have sworn testimony from numerous, often high-ranking and educated witnesses, recorded in formal legal and ecclesiastical documents, all describing the same incredible event. The sheer volume and consistency of these reports, spanning different centuries and cultures within Christianity, from Saint Teresa of Avila to Saint Francis of Assisi, is difficult to simply dismiss as mass hallucination or coordinated lies. On the other hand, we have plausible, naturalistic explanations rooted in our understanding of the human brain and its susceptibility to altered states of consciousness. It is possible that the truth lies in a combination of these factors, perhaps a genuine yet poorly understood psychosomatic ability. A profound mind-body connection allowed certain individuals in states of extreme religious fervor to trigger a neurological state that altered their relationship with gravity in a way that was both physically real and psychologically mediated. The Church's own cautious stance invites us to hold both possibilities in tension, to acknowledge the compelling witness testimony without ignoring the rational explanations, and to accept that some historical mysteries may forever reside in that ambiguous space between the material world and the power of the human spirit. Yet the desire to rise above the earthly plane is not unique to the West. In many ways, the most sophisticated and enduring traditions exploring this phenomenon come from the East, where the idea of levitation is deeply woven into the very fabric of spiritual practice. Here, we encounter the concept of the Siddhi's extraordinary powers or perfections that are said to naturally emerge in an individual who has achieved a profound state of mental discipline and spiritual purity through intense meditation and yogic practice. These are not the end goal of the spiritual path, but rather considered potential side effects, signposts of progress that a true sage is advised to ignore lest they become a distraction from the ultimate goal of enlightenment. Among these siddhis is the power known as laghima, which translates to lightness or becoming weightless. This is the direct, ancient term for the ability to levitate, rooted in the idea that one can, through mastery of the life force or prana, overcome the binding force of gravity, which is itself seen as a gross physical manifestation of earthly attachment. The legends surrounding Tibetan Buddhist monks are particularly compelling. For centuries, travelers' tales and monastic chronicles have spoken of meditators achieving such profound stillness and inner heat, known as tummo, that they could literally rise from the ground. One famous account, often cited by explorers like Alexandra David Neal, describes the practice of lung gom pa, a form of intense meditation and breath control that allowed practitioners to traverse enormous distances across the high plateaus at an incredible gliding speed, their feet barely touching the ground. These stories are not presented as mere fantasy, but as the documented achievements of advanced adepts, achieved after years, often decades, of solitary retreat and unwavering dedication. Similarly, the lives of many Indian yogis and saints are filled with accounts of floating during samadhi, the deepest state of meditative absorption. The 16th century Saint Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was frequently described by his followers as leaping into the air in ecstatic dance during kirtan, sometimes appearing to hover, so overcome with divine love that his physical form seemed to transcend its material limitations. This ancient ideal even has a fascinating modern counterpart that bridges the gap between timeless tradition and contemporary experimentation. In the 1980s and 90s, the Transcendental Meditation movement, founded by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, brought global attention to a practice they called yogic flying. In highly publicized demonstrations, groups of practitioners would sit in the lotus position on thick foam mats and then begin to hop, and sometimes appear to briefly hover in short bursts. The TM organization claimed this was the initial stage of true levitation, a physical manifestation of a coherent and uplifted state of consciousness. They even pointed to sociological studies suggesting that when large groups gathered to practice this yogic flying together, it produced a Maharishi effect that allegedly reduced crime rates and lowered stress in the surrounding community. These claims, while controversial and widely debated, demonstrate the enduring power of this ancient aspiration, reframed for a modern scientific age. The very attempt to systematize and mass-produce a spiritual power like Laghima is a uniquely 20th century phenomenon, one that seeks to validate ancient wisdom through the lens of collective practice and statistical analysis. This naturally leads us to a critical interpretive fork in the road, one that lies at the heart of understanding these Eastern traditions. Are we to take these accounts as literal, physical feats, or are they powerful metaphors for an internal, spiritual transformation? The metaphorical interpretation is rich with meaning. In this view, levitation is a beautiful symbol for the lightening of the soul's burdens. The weight that is being shed is not physical mass, but the heavy accumulation of ego, desire, fear, and attachment that keeps the human spirit bound to the cycle of suffering. To levitate, then, is to achieve a state of inner freedom, buoyancy, and transcendence, where one is no longer dragged down by worldly concerns. The yogi who appears to float is, in a spiritual sense, truly ascending, rising above the turmoil of the mind to dwell in a state of pure, blissful awareness. This interpretation aligns perfectly with the core teachings of both Hinduism and Buddhism, which emphasize non-attachment and the liberation of consciousness from its identification with the temporary physical form. However, to dismiss all accounts as only metaphor might be to overlook something equally profound. The practitioners and witnesses within these traditions sincerely believe in the literal possibility of these events. The rigorous training, the specific breathing techniques, and the precise visualizations are all designed to produce tangible, physiological results. Some researchers have suggested that the pinnacle of these practices could involve a conscious manipulation of the body's biomagnetic field, creating an interaction with the Earth's own magnetism that results in a genuine reduction of apparent weight. Others point to the demonstrated ability of advanced meditators to exert extraordinary control over autonomic bodily functions, slowing their heart rate, raising their skin temperature in freezing conditions, as evidence that the limits of the mind's influence over the body are not fully known. Perhaps the ultimate truth bridges both interpretations. It is possible that in these extreme states of unified consciousness, a genuine, subtle physical effect occurs amid measurable lightening that, in the heightened perception of the meditator or the awe-filled eyes of a devotee, is experienced and reported as full levitation. The Siddhis, then, may not be a choice between literal physics and spiritual metaphor, but a mysterious intersection where the transformation of consciousness begins to subtly warp the very fabric of material reality, offering us a fleeting, miraculous glimpse into a state of being where the distinction between spirit and matter simply dissolves. This concept of a hidden science leads us directly to the sun-baked sands of Egypt, a land whose very name is synonymous with ancient mysteries. While the pyramids and temples stand as breathtaking monuments to what the Egyptians achieved, they also stand as silent guardians of a profound secret. How did they do it? The conventional tools found in archaeological digs, the copper chisels, The stone hammers feel almost laughably inadequate when held up against the staggering precision and scale of their constructions. This glaring disconnect has fueled a compelling theory that the true genius of the Egyptians wasn't just in their brute force engineering, but in a sophisticated, esoteric understanding of the universe's fundamental laws, a knowledge that was either lost over time or deliberately concealed from the uninitiated. To find evidence for this, we must look not at the stones they left behind, but at the fragile, fragmented texts that survived the millennia and the powerful legends that outlived them. Our most significant window into this possible lost wisdom comes from a collection of writings known as the Hermetic texts, attributed to the mythical sage Hermes Trismegistus, a fusion of the Egyptian god Thoth and the Greek god Hermes. These texts were written in the early centuries of the Common Era but claim to preserve knowledge far more ancient. The core philosophy of Hermeticism is captured in a single, revolutionary phrase: as above, so below; as below, so above. This principle suggests a universe of perfect correspondence, where the macrocosm of the stars and planets is mirrored in the microcosm of the human soul and the earthly realm. To the Hermetic initiate, the material world was not separate from the spiritual. It was its direct expression, and by understanding the spiritual laws that governed reality, one could learn to manipulate the physical world itself. The texts speak of ascending through the spheres of the planets, of mastering the elements, and of achieving a state of gnosis, or divine knowledge that granted power over nature. This isn't about superstition. It's presented as a coherent, if deeply symbolic, system of natural philosophy. If the ancient Egyptians, or a priestly class among them, possessed such a worldview, it reframes their architectural achievements not as mere tomb building, but as a form of applied sacred science. The perfect alignment of the pyramids with celestial bodies, the use of specific mathematical ratios like the golden mean, and the obsession with precise orientation could all be seen as physical manifestations of this as above, so below principle, attempts to create a microcosm of the ordered cosmos on Earth. But if this knowledge was so profound, where did it go? The historical record shows a clear pattern of suppression and loss. The Great Library of Alexandria, the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world, was destroyed in a series of fires, taking with it untold numbers of scrolls that may have contained the original Egyptian scientific and philosophical traditions. Later, as Christianity and then Islam became dominant, pagan and esoteric texts were often actively destroyed or allowed to decay. This systematic erasure of pre-existing knowledge creates a giant void in our understanding, a black hole into which the secrets of Egyptian technology may have vanished. It is precisely this void that gives life to one of archaeology's most enduring and tantalizing legends, the Hall of Records, popularized by the famed psychic Edgar case in the 1920s and 30s. The legend posits that a secret chamber exists beneath the pores of the Great Sphinx at Giza. This isn't a pharaoh's tomb filled with gold, but a library. Case prophesied that this hall contains the complete records of the lost civilization of Atlantis, entrusted to the Egyptians for safekeeping. Within these records, he claimed, would be the full account of their advanced technology, including the methods they used to construct the pyramids. While mainstream Egyptology largely dismisses Case's specific visions, the idea of a hidden chamber has proven remarkably resilient. Geological surveys around the Sphinx have, in fact, revealed anomalies and possible cavities beneath the limestone bedrock. Furthermore, ancient Egyptian texts themselves speak of the sacred library of Thoth, and the Sphinx, known as Hormakhet or Horus in the horizon, has always been associated with guardianship and hidden knowledge. The legend powerfully addresses the frustrating gaps in our historical record. We have the monumental results of Egyptian genius, but we lack their instruction manual. The notion that this manual written on papyrus scrolls or inscribed on tablets still exists, waiting to be discovered in a hidden, climate-controlled chamber, offers a romantic and thrilling solution to the mystery. It suggests that the answers to how they moved multi-ton blocks and achieved such impossible precision are not lost forever, but merely sleeping, protected by the silent, enigmatic Sphinx. This brings us to the crucial speculative leap. If such a hall were discovered, what might it actually say about levitation? Proponents of alternative theories suggest the knowledge would be encoded, not in a straightforward engineering textbook, but in the language of myth and symbolism. The Egyptian gods were not just deities, they were personifications of natural forces and cosmic principles. The god Shu, for example, was the god of air and sunlight, often depicted holding up the sky. Could the stories of Shu separating the earth Jeb from the sky not be a cosmological metaphor for creating a space of anti-gravity, of inserting an air-like force between a stone and the earth to make it light? Similarly, the opening of the mouth ceremony, a ritual performed on statues and mummies to bring them to life, involved the use of a ceremonial adze. Some researchers have wondered if this was a symbolic remnant of a different kind of technology, where a specific instrument, perhaps using vibration or sound, was used to animate or activate the properties of stone, making it easier to move or shape. The Egyptians were masters of duality, where every physical act had a spiritual counterpart. The act of building a pyramid was simultaneously a physical construction project and a spiritual act of creating a staircase to the stars. Is it so difficult to imagine that their construction methods also possessed this duality, employing both physical labor and an applied, sacred science that manipulated the very forces of nature through sound, magnetism, or a forgotten understanding of earth energies? The secrets of the pharaohs may not be hidden in a single, dusty chamber, but woven into the very fabric of their culture, waiting for us to learn how to read their world not just as history, but as a sophisticated technological and spiritual blueprint. So how could something as intangible as sound possibly lift a stone that weighs more than an elephant? The answer lies in a fascinating principle of physics known as acoustic levitation. And while it sounds like science fiction, it's a phenomenon you can actually witness in laboratories today. At its core, acoustic levitation uses the power of intense sound waves to create an invisible yet powerful force field. Imagine throwing a pebble into a still pond and watching the ripples spread out. Now imagine if you could throw two pebbles in at just the right spots so that their ripples collided and created a pattern of perfectly still, intersecting lines. This is essentially what scientists create with sound, a standing wave. By directing sound waves of a specific frequency at a reflector, they create a stable pattern of high pressure and low pressure zones. In the high-pressure zones, the air molecules are tightly packed together, while in the low-pressure zones, they are spread far apart. A small object, like a droplet of water or a piece of styrofoam, can be trapped in one of these low-pressure nodes, perfectly suspended in mid-air, pushed upward by the high-pressure areas below it and held in place by the ones above. It's like the object is resting on an acoustic cushion, cradled by the invisible push and pull of sound itself. Modern science has turned this principle from a theoretical curiosity into a practical tool. Researchers now use acoustic levitators to handle very delicate materials like pharmaceutical compounds or biological samples without any physical contact that could contaminate them. In stunning videos from institutions like NASA, you can see them levitating everything from liquids and crystals to tiny insects and small pieces of wood. The speakers used are powerful, and the frequencies are often ultrasonic, meaning they are above the range of human hearing, but the underlying physics is demonstrably real. The major limitation, of course, is scale. We can levitate a marble, but we are nowhere near lifting an 80-ton granite block. The energy required to create a standing wave large and powerful enough to suspend such a massive object would be astronomical with our current technology. Yet the fundamental principle is proven. Sound can, indeed, counteract gravity. This undeniable scientific fact is what breathes new life into some of the most persistent and widespread legends from the ancient world, stories that have been dismissed as pure fantasy for centuries. These legends often point to the use of sound not as background ritual music, but as the primary tool of construction. One of the most famous comes from the Arab historian al-Masudi, who wrote in the 10th century about the building of the Great Pyramid. He recorded a tradition that the builders used a type of papyrus scroll, which, when placed under the stones, would make them lose their weight and become easy to move. While he doesn't explicitly mention sound, this idea of an external agent causing a loss of weight is a powerful clue. More direct accounts come from other parts of the world. In the Himalayas, there are tales of monks using long trumpets and massive drums to generate specific resonant frequencies that would allow small groups of people to lift and transport heavy stones for their monasteries. Perhaps the most detailed story comes from a Swedish farmer and explorer named Henry Kjelsen, who traveled through Tibet in the 1930s. He claimed to have witnessed monks building a wall on a high mountain ledge. According to his account, they did not use ropes or ramps. Instead, a group of 13 monks, along with 6 drummers and 6 trumpeters, stood in a precise semicircle some 63 meters from a cliff face. The instruments and chants were used to produce a specific, resonant frequency. As they played and chanted, a large block of stone sitting on the ground allegedly began to shake, then rise into the air, tracing a graceful parabolic arc before landing softly on the mountain ledge. Kjelsen's account is often met with skepticism, as it was never formally verified, but it perfectly illustrates the core concept. That sound was the engine of the feat. The question then becomes, could ancient cultures have possessed an intuitive or even a formal understanding of this physics? The evidence suggests they had a profound relationship with sound that we have largely lost in our modern, visually dominated world. Many ancient languages, like Sanskrit, were considered to be languages of power, where specific syllables and mantras were believed to have a direct effect on material reality. The concept of Nada Brahma in Hindu philosophy translates to "the world is sound," meaning the entire universe is a manifestation of vibrational energy. The builders of megalithic sites like Stonehenge or the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta demonstrated an incredible understanding of acoustics. In these spaces, certain frequencies create powerful reverberations and standing waves that can be physically felt in the body. It's not a huge leap to suggest that priest-scientists, through centuries of observation and experimentation within these resonant chambers, could have discovered the principles of acoustic levitation. They may have learned that a specific chant played on a specific instrument at a specific distance from a stone of a certain composition could produce a resonant frequency that would lighten its load. This wouldn't require blueprints or electronic devices. It would require an oral tradition passed down through generations of initiates, a sacred science of vibration. In this light, the ancient legends of moving stones with sound transform from myth into a plausible, though lost, technological narrative, a testament to humanity's long and sophisticated quest to harmonize with the invisible forces that shape our world. But our journey doesn't end in Egypt or Tibet. It takes us to one of the most visually stunning and perplexing sights on the planet, the Nazca Desert in Peru. Here, sprawled across a vast, arid plateau, are the famous Nazca lines, enormous geoglyphs etched into the desert floor, some stretching for over 1,000 feet. From the ground, they appear as little more than shallow grooves in the reddish-brown earth, a confusing network of lines and trenches, but from the air, the true wonder reveals itself. These lines coalesce into breathtakingly precise depictions of a hummingbird, a spider, a monkey with an intricately coiled tail, and even a strange humanoid figure often called the astronaut. For centuries, these figures remained largely unknown, hidden in plain sight, until the advent of modern flight in the 1920s allowed pilots to see them in their full, magnificent scale. This fact alone presents us with the first and most fundamental mystery. Why would a culture create such immense and intricate artwork that they themselves could never hope to see in its completed form? The conventional archaeological explanation is both elegant and spiritually resonant. Scholars propose that these lines were sacred pathways used for ritual processions and ceremonies. The Nazca people, who flourished between 2,000 and 1,500 years ago, are believed to have created these geoglyphs as offerings to their gods, who they imagined resided in the sky above. By walking these lines, they were physically tracing the forms of animals and deities that were important to their cosmology, a form of worship performed on a monumental scale. The arid, wind-sheltered environment of the Nazca Plain acted as a perfect canvas, preserving these fragile scratches for millennia. In this view, the lines were never meant to be seen from above by human eyes. Their full form was meant only for the deities they were intended to honor. This interpretation fits neatly within our understanding of ancient spiritual practices, where the effort and precision of the work were themselves acts of devotion. However, the sheer logistical challenge of creating these figures introduces a compelling complication. The precision is staggering. Many of the long, straight lines run for miles without deviating even a fraction of a degree. The curves of the animal figures are smooth and perfectly proportioned, rivaling the work of a modern-day technical draftsman. How did the Nazca achieve this level of accuracy without being able to climb to a vantage point and oversee the work? The mainstream theory suggests they could have used simple yet effective surveying techniques. They might have driven stakes into the ground and stretched ropes to create straight lines, or perhaps built small-scale models on the desert floor and then scaled them up using a grid system. With enough patience and coordination, such a method is certainly plausible. But when you consider the scale and the number of figures, the task becomes almost as monumental as the glyphs themselves. Maintaining perfect alignment across vast, uneven terrain using only stakes and ropes would have been an incredible feat of engineering and organization. It is precisely at this point where conventional explanations meet their practical limits that more speculative theories take flight. In the mid-20th century, authors like Erich von Däniken looked at the Nazca lines and saw something entirely different. He and other proponents of the ancient astronaut theory proposed a radical idea. The lines were not religious pathways but functional markers. They suggested the long, straight lines were runways for extraterrestrial spacecraft, and the animal figures were directional beacons or identification symbols meant to be seen from the cockpit of a descending vehicle. In this scenario, the gods the Nazca were worshipping were not mythological beings, but literal, flesh and blood visitors from another world, and the lines were part of a primitive spaceport. The figure known as the astronaut, with its large, round head and seemingly bulky suit, was pointed to as potential evidence of this contact, a depiction of the visitors themselves. While this theory captures the imagination, it is heavily criticized by archaeologists for its lack of physical evidence and for imposing a modern, technological interpretation onto an ancient culture's spiritual art. But there is a third and perhaps even more intriguing possibility that bridges the gap between these extremes. What if the Nazca did have an aerial view, but not in the way we might think? What if the knowledge to create these precise, giant figures implies that the builders themselves had developed a means of flight, or even a primitive form of the levitation technology we have been exploring? We know that many ancient cultures in South America were masters of textiles and used hot air for various purposes. It is not beyond the realm of possibility that the Nazca could have developed large, tethered hot air balloons or massive kites. A person suspended even a few hundred feet in the air would have had a commanding view of the desert canvas, allowing them to direct teams on the ground with hand signals or reflected light, ensuring the lines remained straight and the curves were true. There are even local legends that speak of the Nazca flying over the desert, which mainstream scholars interpret as shamanic, out-of-body journeys, but which could also be a cultural memory of actual physical flight. This leads to a truly fascinating connection. If the Nazca had mastered a form of aerial surveillance, even a basic one, it would solve the logistical mystery of the line's creation. But what if their understanding of the air went even deeper? We have already explored how sound and vibration could theoretically be used to manipulate matter. The Nazca Desert is an incredibly resonant environment, a silent, bowl-like plain where sound can carry for extraordinary distances. Is it possible that the Nazca, like the builders we discussed earlier, had discovered acoustic principles that allowed them to achieve limited levitation? A shaman or priest, lifted just a few dozen feet into the air by the focused chants and drumbeats of the community, would have had the perfect vantage point to orchestrate the creation of these massive glyphs. This idea transforms the Nazca lines from a simple ritual site into a potential demonstration of a lost, applied science. The lines themselves were the ritual, but the method of their creation might have involved a sophisticated blend of coordinated labor and a sacred technology of sound and flight. The figures, then, are not just pictures for the gods. They are the enduring proof of a human achievement that we are only now beginning to consider possible. A permanent testament to a time when the boundary between earth and sky was far more permeable than we ever imagined. From the sacred geometries of ancient temples to the cryptic symbols of medieval laboratories, this quest for mastery over matter finds another profound expression in the mysterious world of alchemy. While we often picture alchemists as eccentric old men obsessed with turning lead into gold, their true pursuit was far more ambitious and deeply spiritual. They sought nothing less than the ultimate transformation of the self and the universe, and hidden within their bizarre illustrations and coded manuscripts are tantalizing clues that they, too, were grappling with the secrets of weightlessness. The legendary philosopher's stone, the central goal of all alchemical work, was described not merely as a substance that could transmute metals, but as the very key to spiritual enlightenment and physical perfection. It was often called the elixir of life, a panacea that could heal all illness and grant immortality, but its descriptions also contain peculiar physical properties. Some texts refer to it as an incredibly dense, heavy material, while others describe it as being lighter than air, possessing a celestial nature that allowed it to defy the downward pull of the earthly realm. This apparent contradiction is the heart of the alchemical mystery, where physical and spiritual qualities were seen as two sides of the same coin. The process of creating the stone, known as the Great Work, was an arduous multi-stage operation of purifying and combining base materials, symbolically represented by a series of colors: the blackening, the whitening, the yellowing, and finally, the ultimate reddening. Each stage was not just a chemical process, but a parallel inner purification for the alchemist, a burning away of their own base desires and impurities. To achieve the final result was to become spiritually weightless, unburdened by the heavy dross of the ego and material attachments. In this context, the ability to physically levitate would have been seen as the ultimate external proof of this internal, spiritual achievement, a visible sign that the alchemist had truly mastered both the inner and outer worlds. To understand how they might have approached this, we need to decipher their unique language. Alchemists wrote in a dense code of symbols, allegories, and emblems, not to be deliberately obscure, but to protect their sacred art from the uninitiated and to communicate multi-layered truths that straightforward language could not contain. A common image is that of the winged and wingless dragon. The wingless dragon represents gross, unrefined matter bound heavily to the earth. The winged dragon symbolizes that same matter after it has been spiritually activated and purified, now capable of ascending to the heavens. Another powerful symbol is the volatile Mercury, often depicted as a spirit or a bird escaping from a flask. This represents the volatile, spiritual principle within matter being released from its fixed physical prison. When an alchemist wrote about fixing the volatile or volatilizing the fixed, they were describing a process of making the spiritual tangible and the physical spiritual, a state where the distinction between the two begins to dissolve. If such a state could be achieved in a physical substance, if the philosopher's stone truly possessed this dual nature of being both intensely real and transcendently light, then perhaps it could impart that quality to other objects, or even to the alchemist who had become one with the stone. The legendary powder of projection, a small amount of which could transform a mass of lead into gold, might be reinterpreted not as a simple chemical catalyst, but as an agent that temporarily altered the vibrational state or gravitational relationship of the base metal, making it ascend to a nobler, more perfect form. The transmutation of metals, then, becomes a metaphor for the transmutation of gravity itself. This brings us to one of the most enigmatic figures in this tradition, a man who straddled the line between legend and history, Saint Germain. An 18th century courtier, musician, and alleged immortal, the Count of Saint Germain was renowned throughout the courts of Europe for his incredible knowledge of chemistry, his mastery of languages, and his seeming agelessness. But among his many rumored abilities was a peculiar and specific skill. He was said to be able to remove the flaws from diamonds, making them larger and more brilliant. The process he supposedly used was not one of cutting, but of gentle heating in a special crucible, a process that sounds remarkably like an alchemical operation. If such a feat were possible, it implies a profound understanding of the crystalline structure of matter and the energy required to rearrange it. More intriguingly, there are accounts that link Saint Germain to the phenomenon of levitation. In one story, he is said to have demonstrated his powers to a skeptical French aristocrat by causing a heavy gold coin to rise from a table and float gently into his hand. Whether these tales are fact or fabulous embellishment, they perfectly capture the alchemical ideal, a man who had achieved such mastery over the hidden laws of nature that he could manipulate matter and gravity with the same ease with which he charmed royalty. He embodied the ultimate alchemist, one for whom the philosopher's stone was not just a chemical recipe, but an attained state of being that granted dominion over the physical world. So, were the alchemists simply using beautiful metaphors, or were they recording literal, physical experiments in a language we have forgotten how to read? The symbolic interpretation is powerful and valid. In this view, the entire laboratory process is a grand allegory for the soul's journey. The sealed flask or alembic is the human body and mind. The base metals are our raw, unrefined passions and negative traits. The fire of the furnace is the intense heat of spiritual discipline and meditation. The final creation of the philosopher's stone is the birth of the enlightened, immortal consciousness, and the levitation that accompanies it is the soul's ultimate freedom from the cycle of birth and death. This internal, psychological reading transforms alchemy from a failed proto-science into a sophisticated and timeless system of spiritual psychology. Yet, to dismiss the entire tradition as only symbolism may be to miss a crucial point. These men and women were working with real furnaces, real retorts, and real, often dangerous, chemicals. Their primary texts are filled with practical, if cryptic, instructions. It is entirely possible that in their relentless quest to purify matter, they stumbled upon physical phenomena that modern science is only now beginning to rediscover. The strange properties they ascribe to their materials, unusual weights, phosphorescent glows, sudden transformations might be the recorded observations of quantum effects or energy states that we are just starting to measure with advanced instruments. Perhaps the levitation they sought was not the cartoonish image of a man floating cross-legged in the air, but a more subtle yet equally miraculous mastery over mass and inertia. The alchemical pursuit represents humanity's most profound and prolonged attempt to bridge the gap between spirit and matter, to prove that consciousness could directly influence the physical world. In their coded texts and shimmering ideals, we find the enduring belief that the ultimate freedom was not just freedom of the soul, but a total liberation from all the laws that bind us, gravity being the most fundamental and visible symbol of them all. Yet, this ancient puzzle is not confined to the dusty pages of history or the stones of forgotten empires. In fact, one of the most compelling and baffling chapters in this ongoing mystery unfolded not in a distant century, but in the early decades of the 20th century in the sweltering heat of Florida. Here, a solitary, 5-foot-tall, 100-pound Latvian immigrant named Edward Leedskalnin accomplished a feat that directly challenges our modern understanding of engineering and physics. Working entirely alone, mostly under the cover of night and shrouded in secrecy, Leedskalnin single-handedly quarried, carved, and erected over 1,100 tons of oolitic limestone, a heavy coral rock, to create the structure now known as Coral Castle. The scale of his achievement is staggering. He moved massive blocks, some weighing as much as 30 tons, the equivalent of a full-sized school bus, and positioned them with an accuracy that would be difficult to achieve even with today's cranes and lasers. And he did it all without any modern machinery, without any help, and while claiming he had simply rediscovered the building secrets of the ancient Egyptians. Leedskalnin was a man of profound contradictions. He was reclusive and eccentric, yet he eagerly gave tours of his ever-growing project, which he originally called Rock Gate Park. He had very little formal education, yet he filled his notebooks with intricate diagrams and writings on magnetism and the nature of electricity. His explanations for how he built his castle were as cryptic as the monument itself. He would simply tell curious visitors that he understood the laws of weight and the secrets of the pyramids. He spoke frequently about magnetism, but not in the way we typically think of it. He believed that all matter, every single atom, was made up of individual magnets, and that by understanding how these tiny magnets interacted, one could control gravity and mass itself. In one of his pamphlets, he wrote, "I have discovered the secrets of the pyramids and have found out how the Egyptians and the ancient builders in Peru, Yucatan, and Asia, with only primitive tools, raised and set in place blocks of stone weighing many tons." For Leedskalnin, this was not a lost art but a recoverable science, a set of principles hidden in plain sight. The question of how he did it has fueled speculation for decades. Eyewitness accounts from the few neighbors who saw him work are few and far between, but they are utterly perplexing. Some reported seeing him simply place his hands on the massive stones, humming or singing, and the blocks would then appear to move almost effortlessly. There were no grinding gears, no roaring engines, and no teams of oxen. When he decided to move his entire castle from Florida City to its current location in Homestead, a distance of 10 miles, he hired a truck driver. The driver later stated that he never saw how Leedskalnin loaded the gigantic stones onto his trailer. Leedskalnin would simply send the driver away for the evening, and by the next morning, all the stones, each weighing multiple tons, would be perfectly loaded and ready for transport. The driver admitted he had no idea how this small, frail man could have possibly managed it. This has led to two primary schools of thought. The first posits that Leedskalnin was simply a brilliant, if unorthodox, engineer who used simple tools and a deep, intuitive understanding of leverage, weight distribution, and pulleys. He was known to use old truck axles and parts to build his own tripods and block and tackle systems. Proponents of this conventional view argue that with enough patience, ingenuity, and time, a single determined person could move immense weights. They point to his coral rock itself, which is porous and can be drilled and shaped more easily than granite, and suggest he used a system of wedges, levers, and gradual lifting with homemade jacks. In this explanation, the mystery is not one of anti-gravity, but one of immense human perseverance and clever, forgotten mechanical technique. The other, more tantalizing theory takes Leedskalnin at his word. If he truly understood the secrets of the pyramids, then perhaps he had indeed rediscovered a form of that ancient acoustic or magnetic levitation we've been exploring. Researchers have noted that many of his carved stones have a peculiar relationship with the Earth's magnetic field. The huge 9-ton gate that guards the entrance to Coral Castle is a famous example of this precision. For decades, it was a massive stone door so perfectly balanced on a single automobile bearing that a child could push it open with a single finger. It rotated without a sound and fit so snugly within its frame that you couldn't see light through the cracks. Engineers were baffled by its perfection, and it rotated flawlessly for over 60 years until it finally had to be realigned in the 1980s. This level of precision hints at a knowledge that goes far beyond simple lever mechanics. Some investigators have suggested he was using a form of electromagnetic or electrostatic force, perhaps generated by the specific geological properties of the coral rock itself or by apparatus he built to temporarily negate the weight of the stones. His cryptic writings about perpetual motion holders and the cosmic force of magnetism lend just enough credence to this idea to keep it alive. So was Edward Leedskalnin, a 20th century alchemist, a man who independently stumbled upon the same principles that might have been used to build the pyramids and Sacsayhuaman. Or was he an eccentric genius whose sheer mechanical ingenuity has been mythologized into something paranormal because we cannot fathom the dedication required? Coral Castle stands today as a permanent, tangible riddle. It is a monument that refuses to give up its secret, a modern-day megalithic site built not by a king or a culture, but by one solitary man who claimed to have unlocked the universe's most fundamental laws. His story powerfully demonstrates that the search for this lost science did not end with the pharaohs or the Inca. It simply went quiet, waiting for another curious mind to pick up the thread. In the silent, sun-bleached courtyards of Coral Castle, the ancient question is asked once more, not in whispers, but in the sheer, undeniable weight of 1,100 tons of coral rock, meticulously placed by a man who insisted it was all perfectly simple, if only you knew how to look. Among the many tantalizing stories of acoustic levitation, few are as detailed and captivating as the account attributed to Swedish physician and explorer Dr. Jarl. His story, while controversial, provides a remarkably specific narrative that seems to pull the concept directly from the realm of vague legend into a tangible, witnessed event. According to the tale, which was publicized by other authors in the mid-20th century, Dr. Jarl was traveling in Tibet during the early 1930s, a time when the region was largely closed to outsiders. Due to his previous connections and his medical work, he was allegedly granted rare access to a remote monastic community. It was here, high in the thin air of the Himalayas, that he claimed to have witnessed something that would define the rest of his life, the construction of a monastery wall using the power of sound. The description of the setup is precise and deeply ritualistic. Dr. Jarl reported that a group of monks had positioned themselves in a specific geometric formation. They were not haphazardly gathered, but arranged in a precise semicircle, facing a cliff face from a distance of about 250 feet. At the center of this semicircle lay a large, heavy stone block. The key instruments in this extraordinary operation were not small or subtle. The monks used massive, long trumpets and enormous drums, instruments designed to produce low, resonant frequencies that could carry across vast distances and penetrate deep into the earth and stone. The ceremony began not with physical exertion, but with a period of focused meditation and chanting, as the monks prepared both themselves and the environment for the task ahead. This preparatory phase underscores the idea that this was not merely a mechanical process, but a sacred science requiring a specific state of mind and communal harmony. Then the operation commenced. The drummers and trumpeters began to play, but not in a chaotic cacophony. They produced a sustained, dissonant chord, a specific and powerful combination of notes that was intentionally unsettling to the ear. The sound was not meant to be melodious but functional, a raw application of acoustic power. According to Dr. Giles' account, as this intense sonic field built and focused on the stone, a remarkable transformation began to occur. The massive block first started to vibrate subtly, then it began to shake more violently, as if responding to the vibrations in the air around it. Then, in a moment that defies all conventional understanding, the stone slowly lifted from the ground. It did not shoot skyward, but began a slow, steady, and controlled ascent, tracing a graceful parabolic arc through the thin mountain air. It rose to a height of nearly 250 feet before gently and perfectly landing upon the high mountain ledge where the new monastery wall was being constructed. The process was then repeated block by block until the wall was complete, all accomplished without a single rope, pulley, or ramp in sight. When analyzing the credibility of Dr. Giles' account, we immediately run into significant hurdles. The story is almost entirely second-hand. It was popularized by other authors, primarily a Swedish aircraft designer named Henry Kjellson, who claimed to have heard it from Giles himself. There are no known original field notes, photographs, or official publications from Dr. Giles that directly document the event. This lack of primary source material naturally leads to deep skepticism within the scientific and historical communities. Critics rightly point out that the story fits a little too neatly into the Western romanticization of Tibet as a land of hidden mystical masters and impossible feats. It emerged during a period when tales of Eastern esotericism were captivating European and American audiences, making it a perfect candidate for embellishment or even outright fabrication. Furthermore, the precise physical details, while compelling, also raise questions. The energy required to levitate a stone large enough for construction using audible sound waves would be immense, likely producing sound pressure levels that would be damaging or even lethal to any human standing nearby, a detail the story does not address. Yet, despite these valid criticisms, the account remains a cornerstone of the ancient acoustic levitation theory for several compelling reasons. First, its specificity sets it apart from vaguer legends. The description of the semicircular formation, the specific instruments, the dissonant chord, and the parabolic trajectory of the stone all provide a level of tangible detail that feels more like a witness report than a mythical folktale. Second, it aligns perfectly with other, more fragmented traditions from the region, such as the practice of Lung Gompa, which we discussed earlier, where monks were said to traverse great distances with a gliding motion. The Giles story can be seen as a specific, applied version of this broader concept, using the same principles of breath and sound not for travel but for construction. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the story provides a complete end-to-end narrative that demonstrates not just the what, but the how. It offers a plausible, if unverified, methodology that bridges the gap between the abstract principle of acoustic levitation and a practical, real-world application. For proponents of alternative history, Dr. Giles' account is not a settled fact, but a crucial piece of anecdotal evidence, a detailed clue left behind, suggesting that the secrets of the pyramids and other ancient wonders might not be completely lost, but preserved in the oral traditions and secret practices of a few isolated cultures, waiting for the day when our own science matures enough to understand them. After journeying through so many accounts of the impossible, from silent stones to flying saints, it's time to pause our historical tour and step into the modern laboratory. We must ask the definitive, critical question: does our current understanding of physics leave any room for these monumental feats to be real? To answer that, we need to start with the universe's most stubborn rule, gravity. It is the force that relentlessly glues us to the planet, the invisible curvature in space-time caused by mass that makes an apple fall and keeps the moon in orbit. For any object to levitate, it must exert a force equal and opposite to its weight to counteract this relentless downward pull. For a tiny insect, this is trivial. For a human being or a 30-ton block of granite, the energy required becomes astronomical. This is the core of the scientific challenge. Levitation isn't just about getting something off the ground. It's about continuously fighting the entire planet's gravitational field, and that takes a phenomenal amount of work. Science, of course, has not been idle in this arena. We have developed several remarkable methods to achieve levitation, but each comes with a set of very strict, very limiting conditions that seem to confine these miracles to the laboratory bench. The most familiar is magnetic levitation. We see this in high-speed maglev trains that float silently above their tracks, but this only works because the train is made of or contains specific magnetic materials, and the track is an incredibly powerful electromagnet. Try to levitate a piece of wood, a drop of water, or a human body with a standard magnet, and nothing happens. These materials are transparent to magnetic fields. Then there is aerodynamics, the principle that keeps airplanes aloft. But this isn't true levitation. It's a careful balance of forces where forward thrust creates lift under the wings, and it requires constant movement through a fluid, the air. A stationary object cannot hover using aerodynamic principles alone. This brings us back to the method most often linked to ancient legends, acoustic levitation. And here, modern science performs what can only be described as genuine magic. Using powerful speakers and carefully tuned reflectors, scientists can create a stable standing wave of sound. In the nodes of this wave, the points of minimum pressure small objects can be trapped. In laboratories around the world, you can watch videos of water droplets, tiny crystals, and even small insects floating completely unsupported in mid-air, cradled by nothing but invisible sound waves. The principle is undeniably real and incredibly useful for handling sensitive materials without contamination. However, the scale is brutally restrictive. The amount of acoustic energy needed to levitate an object scales dramatically with its size. To lift something as small as a pea requires significant power. To lift a marble would need a sound system of deafening, likely lethal intensity. The leap from suspending a water droplet to hoisting an 80-ton granite block is not just a big step. It's a chasm wider than the Grand Canyon with our current technology. The energy required would be comparable to that of a massive explosion, focused into a sustained sonic blast. So when we take this cold, hard scientific perspective back to the historical accounts, we are faced with a stark conclusion. The known methods of levitation, magnetic, aerodynamic, and acoustic, are utterly incapable of explaining the feats attributed to the ancients. Magnetic levitation requires materials that stone simply is not. Aerodynamic levitation requires constant motion and an airfoil shape, which a block of stone does not have. Acoustic levitation, while the most promising in theory, is currently limited to the realm of the very, very small. The idea that a group of monks with drums and trumpets could generate the focused acoustic power to lift a multi-ton stone, with nothing more than their lungs and ritual instruments, violates fundamental principles of energy conservation and acoustical physics as we understand them today. From a strictly orthodox scientific standpoint, the massive feats described in these legends remain firmly in the realm of the impossible. This doesn't mean our ancestors were liars or fools, but it does force us to consider that if they were witnessing something real, then they may have been observers of a phenomenon for which we have not yet written the physics. This leads us to a frontier of science so controversial it blurs the line between the physical and the mental entirely. The possibility that consciousness itself might be the ultimate tool for manipulating matter. For centuries, the idea that a disciplined mind could influence the physical world was relegated to the realms of spirituality and superstition. Yet, in the 20th century, this ancient concept found a new, if contentious, home within the halls of military intelligence and academic laboratories under the name of psychokinesis, or PK. This is the purported ability to move or affect objects with the power of the mind alone. and it represents the most direct parallel to the accounts of meditating monks and saints we've explored. The notion that ancient mystics could have mastered a form of focused mental energy becomes slightly less fantastical when we consider that no less an institution than the United States government once invested millions of dollars to investigate it. The now declassified Stargate project was a decades-long program run primarily by the CIA and Defense Intelligence Agency, initially aiming to harness psychic abilities for Cold War espionage. While its most publicized aspect was remote viewing, the ability to gather intelligence about distant locations using the mind, the program also delved into the potential for psychokinesis. The underlying hypothesis was staggering. If human consciousness could, in some way, extend beyond the brain to gather information, could it also extend to exert a tiny but measurable force on the physical world? The scientific attempts to measure this phenomenon have been as fascinating as they are divisive. One of the most famous experimental setups involved a device known as a random number generator. Imagine a machine that is essentially a digital coin flipper designed to produce a perfectly random sequence of ones and zeros. The premise of the experiment was to see if a human subject, through intense mental focus and intention, could somehow bias this machine, causing it to produce more ones than zeros or vice versa in a statistically significant way. Across thousands of trials conducted by various researchers, the results were just that, statistically significant, but only by a tiny, almost negligible margin. The effects were so small and so difficult to replicate consistently that the entire field remained mired in controversy. Skeptics rightly pointed out that minor flaws in experimental design, publication bias where only positive results get reported, or simple statistical anomalies could easily account for these faint signals. For the mainstream scientific community, which demands robust, repeatable results, the evidence for psychokinesis has never been strong enough to cross the threshold from anomaly to accepted fact. The consensus is that there is no convincing evidence that the human mind can directly influence matter in a way that violates known physical laws. This brings us to a crucial distinction, one that might help bridge the immense gap between these faint laboratory signals and the monumental feats of legend. Perhaps the ancient practitioners weren't using individual willpower to lift a single stone, but were instead tapping into a collective, synchronized form of consciousness. Think back to the account of Dr. Jal and the Tibetan monks. They weren't acting as isolated individuals, they were a coordinated group arranged in a specific formation, chanting and playing instruments in unison. This synchronization could have served a dual purpose. On one level, it was a method of creating the precise acoustic frequencies we discussed. On another, deeper level, it might have been a technology for aligning the brainwaves and mental states of the entire group, creating a unified field of intention. Modern studies on group meditation have shown that when people meditate together, their brainwaves can become synchronized, a phenomenon known as phase locking. Some speculative research has even suggested that large groups practicing coherent meditation might have a small but measurable effect on reducing violence and crime in surrounding communities, a concept known as the Maharishi effect. While this is a long way from levitating stones, it introduces the provocative idea that group consciousness might be more than the sum of its parts, capable of producing effects that are undetectable at the individual level. So, could the builders of the pyramids or the creators of the Nazca lines have been masters of this collective mental technology? Imagine a society where spiritual and physical development were not separate paths, but a single, integrated discipline. The construction of a temple would not be just a physical labor project, but a grand communal ritual. The workers and priests would undergo rigorous training in meditation and breath control, not merely for religious reasons, but to achieve a specific, practical state of mind. Through days or weeks of chanting, drumming, and focused intention, they would enter a shared, heightened state of consciousness. In this state, their collective mental energy, focused through ritual and perhaps amplified by the specific acoustics or geology of the site, might have interacted with the physical world in a way we can no longer easily replicate in our fragmented, individualistic modern societies. Their psychokinesis wouldn't have been a superpower, but a cultivated socio-spiritual technology, as integral to their engineering as a crane is to ours. This perspective doesn't ask us to believe in magic, but to consider that human consciousness, especially when operating in a coherent, ritualized group, might have properties and potentials that our current scientific models, focused on the isolated individual in a sterile lab, are simply not equipped to detect or understand. The mystery of ancient levitation, therefore, may not be locked away in a lost blueprint for a machine, but encoded in a lost manual for the human mind itself, a set of instructions for achieving a state of collective focus so powerful that the boundary between thought and reality becomes, for a moment, permeable. After such a deep dive into the compelling evidence and theories, we must now turn a critical eye to the other side of the coin, because for every tantalizing account of ancient wonders, there exists an equally plausible explanation rooted in human fallibility. The history of levitation is unfortunately also a history of deception, delusion, and misinterpretation, a narrative thread we must follow with just as much rigor if we are to approach the truth. Our journey would be incomplete without acknowledging the powerful role of the hoax. Throughout history, the allure of the miraculous has proven an irresistible temptation for charlatans seeking fame, fortune, or simply the satisfaction of fooling the public. The 19th and early 20th centuries were a golden age for such frauds, a time when spiritualism swept across Europe and America, and seances became fashionable parlor games. In these dimly lit rooms, self-proclaimed mediums would claim to conjure spirits, and with them, feats of levitation. A table might shudder and rise, or the medium themselves might appear to float in the air, shrouded in ethereal gauze. The methods once exposed were often laughably simple: hidden wires, black threads against a dark background, or cleverly designed harnesses concealed beneath voluminous clothing. Perhaps the most famous of these was the Scottish medium Daniel Dunglar's Home, who was never caught in outright fraud and performed levitations for royalty and scientists alike. Yet, even with Home, the lack of controlled conditions and his refusal to perform under specific experimental scrutiny leaves his legacy permanently shrouded in a cloud of reasonable doubt. These successful hoaxes didn't just fool the gullible, they actively poisoned the well, casting a shadow of suspicion over every genuine mystical tradition and making it exponentially more difficult for serious researchers to be taken seriously. Beyond deliberate fraud, we must also contend with the quirks and vulnerabilities of the human mind itself, particularly the phenomenon of mass hallucination. Human perception is not a perfect video recording. It is a constructed, interpretive process heavily influenced by expectation, belief, and social pressure. When a group of people shares a powerful, common belief and is placed in a highly charged emotional environment, such as a religious revival, a fervent prayer meeting, or a desperate seance, the conditions are ripe for a shared perceptual experience. One person, perhaps in a genuine state of ecstatic trance, might cry out that they see their saint floating. In the contagious atmosphere of shared faith, others, straining their eyes in the flickering candlelight, might genuinely begin to perceive the same thing. Their brains, seeking to match expectation with sensory input, fill in the gaps, interpreting a shadow, a trick of the light, or the subtle movement of a robe as a miraculous ascent. This isn't lying, it's a well-documented psychological event where individual perceptions synchronize into a collective, albeit false, reality. The power of belief is so potent that it can literally reshape what people see and hear, making it a formidable confounding variable in any historical account of the supernatural. We can break this down further into specific psychological mechanisms. Consider the power of hypnosis and suggestion. A skilled hypnotist can convince a subject that they are floating on a cloud, and the subject will not only feel the sensation, but their body may even exhibit physical changes, such as becoming rigid, a state known as catalepsy. In a religious context, the intense chanting, drumming, and focused prayer of a congregation can induce a similar, highly suggestible trance state. In this altered consciousness, a worshipper's internal, spiritual sensation of soaring towards the divine could be so vivid that they report it as a physical event, and their testimony could then inspire others to have the same experience. Then there are optical illusions and tricks of perspective. In the vast, echoing nave of a Gothic cathedral, with soaring arches and shifting light from stained glass windows, it can be genuinely difficult to judge depth and movement. A figure standing on a high ledge or a priest elevated on a platform could easily be misperceived as hovering, especially by an audience already primed to witness a miracle. Our brains use shortcuts to make sense of the world, and in certain conditions, those shortcuts can lead us spectacularly astray. This brings us to the crucial scientific principle that must govern any investigation into extraordinary claims: the burden of proof. This is the idea that the obligation to provide compelling evidence lies with the person making the remarkable assertion, not with the skeptic to disprove it. If someone claims to have discovered a new species of butterfly, the burden is relatively light. But if someone claims to have defied one of the fundamental laws of physics, the burden of proof becomes immense. They must provide evidence that is clear, repeatable, and able to withstand the most rigorous scrutiny. This is where so many modern claims of levitation fall apart. A grainy, shaky video posted online is not proof. It is an anecdote easily faked with wires or digital effects. A personal testimony, no matter how sincere, is not proof. It is a single data point vulnerable to all the psychological pitfalls we just discussed. For a claim like levitation to be accepted by the scientific community, it would need to be demonstrated repeatedly under controlled laboratory conditions, with multiple cameras from every angle, measurements of weight and gravitational force, and the exclusion of any possible hidden mechanisms. So far, no one has ever claimed the massive monetary prizes offered by skeptical organizations for a demonstrable, supernatural feat under such conditions. This consistent failure to provide ironclad, verifiable proof is, for the skeptic, the most powerful argument of all. Let's apply this critical lens to a specific, famous case that we touched upon earlier, the alleged levitations of Saint Joseph of Cupertino. While the Church's investigation was meticulous for its time, it was not a modern scientific trial. The witnesses were devout believers who already held the saint in awe. They were observing in dim light within a cultural and religious framework that fully accepted the possibility of divine miracles. Could the saint's ecstatic states, which likely involved cataleptic rigidity, have led to sudden, stiff movements that, in the eyes of his brethren, appeared to be a graceful ascent? If he fell to his knees from a standing position with a rigid body, could the quick, jerky motion have been misinterpreted as a short, miraculous hop into the air? The possibility of misperception, however unintentional, cannot be ruled out. This isn't to call the witnesses liars, but to acknowledge that human testimony, especially under emotionally charged and spiritually expectant circumstances, is one of the least reliable forms of evidence. The same critical analysis must be applied to the ancient accounts. The story of Dr. Jal and the Tibetan monks, for all its captivating detail, remains an unverified, second-hand anecdote with no physical evidence to support it. In the harsh light of critical thinking, it serves as a fascinating story, but not as a conclusive data point. Ultimately, navigating this landscape requires a balanced and discerning mind. We must be open to the possibility that our understanding of the universe is incomplete, that there are mysteries still waiting to be solved. The enduring persistence of the levitation myth across countless cultures and millennia suggests it touches on something deep within the human experience. Yet, we must also be fiercely honest about the overwhelming likelihood that the vast majority of these accounts are products of the very human tendencies toward hope, wonder, and at times deception. The true challenge is to hold both possibilities in mind without allowing our desire for magic to override our commitment to reason. By understanding the mechanisms of hoaxes, the fragility of eyewitness testimony, and the immense weight of the burden of proof, we arm ourselves with the tools necessary to sift through the sands of history, separating the rare, gleaming fragments of potential truth from the much larger pile of compelling, beautiful, and ultimately explainable illusion. But the thread of this mystery doesn't end in ancient temples or monastic retreats. It winds its way directly into the heart of the 20th century's most secretive and terrifying laboratories. As the world was engulfed in the flames of the Second World War, rumors began to circulate among Allied intelligence agencies that Nazi Germany was not only developing new and terrible weapons, but was pursuing something far more bizarre, a technology that could fundamentally rewrite the laws of physics. This leads us to one of the most infamous and enigmatic tales in the annals of secret science, the legend of Die Glocke, or the Bell. According to accounts pieced together from various, often contradictory sources, this was not a weapon in the conventional sense. It was described as a large, metallic, bell-shaped object, approximately 9 feet in diameter and 12 to 15 feet tall. Inside, it allegedly contained 2 counter-rotating cylinders filled a violet-colored, mercury-like substance code named Zerum 525. When activated, Die Glocke was said to emit intense radiation and a strange humming sound, and it was purportedly capable of producing bizarre biological effects on living things and, most incredibly, creating a localized anti-gravity field. The stories claim that the device was tested in a secret underground facility in a remote part of Nazi-occupied Poland, codenamed Der Ries, or the Giant. The experiments were said to be so dangerous that they were conducted in heavily shielded chambers, and the scientists involved reportedly suffered from dizziness, sleep disorders, and even severe burns and cancerous growths. While the historical evidence for Die Glocke is murky at best, relying heavily on the controversial writings of Polish journalist Igor Witkowski and later author Nick Cook, the legend persists with a power that is difficult to ignore. It paints a picture of a desperate, morally bankrupt regime throwing immense resources at a fringe science, attempting to harness a force of nature they barely understood in a last-ditch effort to change the course of the war. Whether Die Glocke was a real device, a misunderstood piece of conventional technology, or pure fabrication, its story serves as a crucial bridge to a very real and documented historical event, Operation Paperclip. In the immediate aftermath of the war, a frantic and secretive race began between the United States and the Soviet Union to capture the greatest prize of the conflict, not just territory, but the brilliant and often monstrous minds behind the Nazi war machine. Operation Paperclip was the American program that saw over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians brought to the United States to work for the government. The most famous of these was Wernher von Braun, the architect of the V-2 rocket, who would become the father of the American space program. But the program was far broader, encompassing experts in aerodynamics, chemical weapons, medicine, and rocketry. The ethical dilemma was stark. These were men who had developed weapons using slave labor from concentration camps, yet their knowledge was deemed so vital to national security that their pasts were whitewashed. The rationale was simple and chilling. If we didn't take them, the Soviets certainly would. This mass recruitment effectively transferred an entire ecosystem of advanced and often unorthodox scientific research from the collapsing Third Reich to the superpowers of the Cold War. It begs a profound question. If the Nazis were indeed experimenting with radical concepts like anti-gravity, did that research, and the scientists associated with it, also find a new home behind the classified walls of American and Soviet black projects? We don't have to rely solely on speculation to find clues. Declassified documents from the 1950s and 60s reveal a tangible and serious government interest in anti-gravity research. In the United States, major aerospace corporations were actively exploring the possibility. Companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin's predecessor, and Convair had dedicated research divisions studying gravitics. Aviation studies from the period include remarkable papers with titles like The Gravitational Field and Electrogravitic Propulsion, discussing the theoretical potential of manipulating gravity for flight. One particularly compelling figure is T. Townsend Brown, an American inventor who, as early as the 1920s, claimed to have discovered a connection between high voltage and gravity. He demonstrated devices he called gravitors or lifters, asymmetrical capacitors that, when charged with tens of thousands of volts, would produce a tiny but measurable thrust in the direction of the positive electrode. This phenomenon, now known as the Biefeld-Brown effect, is still debated today. Mainstream physics typically attributes the motion to ion wind, charged air particles pushing against the device rather than true anti-gravity. Yet, the fact that Brown secured contracts with the U.S. Navy and that his work was classified for years indicates that military intelligence saw enough potential in his ideas to warrant serious investigation. Across the Atlantic, the story was the same. The British aviation magazine Jane's All the World's Aircraft reported in the 1950s on these anti-gravity studies, noting that the major players in aerospace were investing heavily in what they believed could be the next revolution in propulsion. These weren't fringe cranks, these were the industrial giants building the world's most advanced aircraft, and they were actively trying to crack the code of gravity itself. This documented history of official interest fuels one of the most persistent conspiracy theories in the world of alternative science, the idea of suppressed technology. The argument goes like this: what if someone, whether a lone inventor or a covert government team, actually succeeded in developing a practical anti-gravity device? The implications would be nothing short of revolutionary. It would instantly render our entire global transportation and energy infrastructure based on burning fossil fuels and pushing against air or ground obsolete. Such a discovery would overturn the global economic and geopolitical order. Proponents of this theory argue that the powers that be, whether a shadowy government agency or the corporate interests that control the energy and aviation sectors, would have an overwhelming incentive to keep such a technology buried. They would buy the patents, silence the inventors with threats or non-disclosure agreements, and discredit any public research, all to maintain the status quo. This narrative of technological suppression provides a convenient explanation for why we don't see flying cars powered by gravity drives, not because it's impossible, but because it's being deliberately hidden from us. And this is where the ancient and the modern narratives collide in a truly breathtaking way. If this speculation has any merit, then the suppressed technology of today could be a direct echo of the lost science of antiquity. Imagine a scenario where the post-war paperclip scientists, sifting through the rubble of the Nazi occult research division known as the Onanub, stumbled upon ancient texts or traditions that describe the very principles they were trying to engineer. Or consider the possibility that modern black-budget research, using supercomputers and quantum theory, has independently arrived at the same conclusions that the builders of the pyramids or the Tibetan monks allegedly understood through intuition and ritual. The persistent rumor that exists within certain ufology circles is that the sudden leap in aviation technology after the war and the occasional sightings of bizarre, triangle-shaped craft performing maneuvers that defy known physics are not evidence of aliens, but are glimpses of our own secretly developed gravity-control aircraft. These speculative ideas, while far from proven, create a compelling and unsettling feedback loop. They suggest that humanity may have been circling the same profound secret for millennia, discovering it, losing it, and rediscovering it again, only to have it locked away once more by the gatekeepers of power. The search for the ancient art of levitation, therefore, is not just an academic exercise in history. It becomes a provocative inquiry into what might be happening in the most classified laboratories on the planet at this very moment, raising the possibility that the ultimate secret of the pharaohs and the monks is not lost at all, but is sitting in a vault, waiting for the right moment, revealed or perhaps to be hidden away forever. While our journey has taken us to the outer edges of speculation, it's powerful to realize that some of these ancient mysteries are now being explored with hard data and scientific instruments, bringing us back to a fascinating and legitimate field of study known as archaeoacoustics. This is the science of sound within ancient structures, and it asks a simple yet profound question. Were our ancestors not just visual architects but acoustic engineers as well? By taking sophisticated recording equipment into millennia-old temples and tombs, researchers are discovering that these sites are not silent ruins. They are, in fact, sophisticated soundscapes designed with an understanding of acoustics that rivals some modern concert halls. Consider the massive 5,000-year-old passage tomb of Newgrange in Ireland. This great grass-covered mound, older than both Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids, is famous for its winter solstice alignment, where a shaft of sunlight illuminates the inner chamber. But step inside and speak, and you'll experience something equally remarkable. The long, stone-lined passageway and the central chamber itself act as a powerful sound resonator. A single voice or the beat of a drum can create a prolonged, booming reverberation that seems to fill the entire space, lasting for several seconds. This isn't an accidental byproduct of the construction. The careful corbelling of the stones and the specific geometry of the chamber appear to be deliberately designed to enhance and prolong sound, creating an immersive, otherworldly auditory experience that would have deeply amplified the power of any ritual performed within. This concept of engineered sound becomes even more dramatic and complex when we travel to the Andes of Peru, to the temple complex of Chavin de Huanta. This was the center of a religious cult that flourished over 3,000 years ago, and it is here that archaeoacoustics reveals what might be the world's oldest known sound system. Deep within the labyrinthine, windowless passages of the temple lies a network of narrow stone ventilation ducts. For decades, their purpose was a mystery until researchers from Stanford University began to test their acoustic properties. They made a stunning discovery. These ducts are not just for air, they are perfectly designed acoustic conduits. When a conch shell trumpet, known as a putu-tu, is blown at the entrance of one of these ducts, the sound is channeled and projected throughout the entire temple complex, its eerie wail seeming to emanate from the very walls themselves. The effect is disorienting and awe-inspiring. Imagine being an initiate in the dark, cramped galleries, hearing these unearthly blasts with no visible source, a sound controlled entirely by unseen priests. This was psychological engineering on a grand scale, a technology designed to manipulate human perception and induce states of fear, wonder, and altered consciousness. But the auditory manipulation at Chavin goes even further. The temple contains carved stone monoliths like the famous Lanzon, a dagger-shaped granite statue hidden in a cruciform chamber deep within the temple's heart. When specific tones are produced near this monolith, it responds. The rock itself begins to vibrate sympathetically, resonating at certain frequencies and creating a humming, almost living sound. Furthermore, some of the ceremonial chambers are designed as what acousticians call filtered resonance chambers. These rooms don't just echo, they selectively amplify certain sound frequencies while deadening others. A low, chanting voice might be amplified into a powerful, resonant drone, while higher-pitched sounds simply vanish. This creates a very specific, controlled sonic environment, one that could physically be felt in the chest and bones of the participants, intensifying the sensory impact of the rituals. The architects of Chavin de Huanta were clearly masters of their craft. using stone not just to create visual forms, but to sculpt sound itself, crafting an auditory experience that could directly influence the human nervous system. So, what does this verified scientific understanding of ancient acoustic prowess mean for our larger question about levitation? It forces a crucial shift in perspective. We can no longer dismiss the legends of stones moved by sound as pure fantasy, because we now have concrete proof that these cultures possessed a sophisticated, even intuitive, knowledge of how sound interacts with matter and space. They knew how to make rock sing, how to project sound over long distances, and how to use resonance to create powerful physical and psychological effects. The leap from using sound to manipulate human consciousness inside a chamber to using sound to manipulate the physical properties of stone outside is still a vast one, but the foundational knowledge was demonstrably there. If a priest-scientist at Chavin could find the resonant frequency of a granite monolith to make it hum, is it such an enormous stretch to imagine that a different culture, with a similar deep understanding, might have experimented with finding the resonant frequency that would make a stone block vibrate so intensely that its effective weight was temporarily reduced? The principle of resonance is key here. Every object has a natural frequency at which it vibrates most easily. Push a child on a swing at just the right moment, and a small rhythmic force can create a large motion. In modern engineering, we fear resonance. It can collapse bridges and shatter glass. But what if that power was understood and harnessed by finding the precise resonant frequency of a specific type of stone and bombarding it with that frequency using drums, trumpets, or voices? It's theoretically possible that the builders could have induced a state of intense vibration. In this state, the friction between the stone and the ground could be drastically reduced, turning a multi-ton block into something that could perhaps be nudged and guided by a small team of workers with levers, rather than requiring thousands of laborers straining on ropes. This doesn't mean the stones floated serenely through the air as often depicted in fantasy. A more likely scenario, supported by both the laws of physics and the anecdotal accounts, is acoustic reduction, not full anti-gravity levitation. The goal wouldn't be to make the stone weightless, but to make it lighter and easier to manage. The intense resonant vibration could momentarily counteract a portion of the gravitational pull, or more accurately, overcome the static friction and inertia that make the initial movement of such a massive object so difficult. The stories of stones shaking and then moving could be a description of this exact phenomenon. The scientific field of granular materials shows us that applying vibration to a collection of particles, like sand or gravel, can make it flow like a liquid. What if a similar principle, applied to the crystalline structure of a solid block of stone, could achieve a temporary, localized fluidity or reduction in effective mass? The remarkable acoustic properties found at Newgrange and Chavin de Huanta provide a crucial piece of the puzzle. They are the smoking gun that proves sound was a central, functional component of ancient ritual and technology. While we may not yet have the complete blueprint for how to levitate an 80-ton block, archaeoacoustics gives us the first, firm, scientific footing to believe that the legends we've been exploring for so long were not born in a vacuum, but were echoes of a very real and lost science of vibration, a science where the very rocks could be made to listen and perhaps to obey. But after examining the intricate stonework of ancient temples and the meticulous accounts of flying saints, we arrive at a profound crossroads. What if we have been asking the wrong question all along? What if the truth behind these stories is not hidden in the physics of the material world, but in the inner landscape of the human psyche? To explore this possibility, we must step back from the laboratory and enter the realm of symbolism, where the act of rising into the air represents something far more ancient and universal than a simple defiance of gravity. Here, the figure of Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist, offers an immensely powerful lens through which to view these enduring myths. Jung introduced the concept of archetypes universal, primal symbols and patterns that reside in what he called the collective unconscious, a deep, shared layer of the human psyche that transcends culture and personal experience. These archetypes shape our dreams, our stories, and our most fundamental understanding of the world. They are the blueprints for the hero, the mother, the trickster, and most relevant to our quest, the symbol of transcendence. And what could be a more potent, visually immediate symbol of transcending one's current state than lifting off from the ground and soaring into the sky? Across virtually every culture and epoch, flight is consistently tied to a cluster of the most profound human aspirations. It is the ultimate metaphor for freedom. Think of the feeling of being trapped by circumstances, by social class, by physical infirmity, or by your own fears. The dream of flying is a direct, visceral escape from all those constraints. It represents liberation from every chain that binds the human spirit to the mundane and the difficult. This symbolism extends powerfully into the spiritual realm. In nearly every religious tradition, heaven, paradise, or the domain of the gods is located in the skies above, while the earth is often associated with suffering, temptation, and mortal limitation. To levitate, then, is to physically enact a spiritual journey, to demonstrate that one has risen above earthly desires and attachments to achieve a state of purity and connection with the divine. The saint floating in prayer is not just a man defying physics. He is a living emblem of a soul that has successfully shed its heavy, worldly burdens and become light enough to approach the sacred. This archetype of ascent also speaks to a deep yearning for ultimate power and knowledge. In mythology, the ability to fly is rarely given to ordinary humans. It is the province of gods, angels, and superheroes. From the winged sandals of Hermes to the cosmic flights of Superman, flight denotes a perspective and an ability that is superhuman. To be above it all is to see the bigger picture, to understand connections that are invisible from the ground, to possess a wisdom and an overview that others lack. The levitating mystic, in this view, is someone who has attained a God's eye view of existence, who has accessed a higher plane of knowledge and returned with insights for those still earthbound. The physical act, whether real or imagined, becomes a dramatic performance of an internal, spiritual achievement. It is a powerful, non-verbal way for a culture to communicate the highest goals of its philosophical or religious system, to become free, to become enlightened, to become, in a sense, divine. When we apply this interpretive framework to the historical accounts we've explored, a compelling and coherent narrative emerges that does not require us to rewrite the laws of physics. The Vimanas of the ancient Indian epics can be understood not as literal spacecraft, but as magnificent psychological metaphors. These soaring chariots represent the journey of the disciplined soul, the Atman, as it ascends through the various layers of consciousness and illusion, overcoming attachments and karmic debts to achieve liberation or moksha. The elaborate descriptions of their construction and power are not technical manuals, but intricate allegories for the complex process of inner purification and the harnessing of spiritual energy required for this ultimate journey. Similarly, the ecstatic levitations of Christian saints like Joseph of Cupertino can be seen as external manifestations of an internal, indescribable state of grace. The intense, all-consuming love of God described by these mystics is an experience so powerful that it can feel like the soul is being physically lifted out of the body, a sensation known as ecstasy. In a culture that believed heaven was literally above, it is a small, symbolic step for devotees to describe their most holy figures as physically ascending in moments of supreme communion. The miracle was not the floating body, but the transformed spirit, and the floating was simply the most powerful language available to express that transformation. This psychological perspective also helps explain the persistent connection between levitation and altered states of consciousness, from the oracle at Delphi breathing in ethylene fumes to the yogi in deep meditation. These states often involve a dissolution of the ego and a blurring of the boundaries between the self and the universe. In such a condition, the sensation of weightlessness, of floating, or of flying is a very common and well-documented experience. The brain, freed from its normal sensory inputs and cognitive constraints, can generate profound feelings of liberation and ascent. For the individual, this is a real phenomenological event. When they later recount their experience, they use the most accurate vocabulary they possess. "I felt as if I were flying." A disciple listening to this account, filled with awe and belief, might easily record it as a literal physical fact. The metaphor, born in a genuine altered state, hardens over time into a legend of miraculous power. This process is not deception. It is the natural evolution of spiritual testimony, where the line between internal truth and external reality becomes beautifully and productively blurred. So, does this mean that every story of levitation is merely a misunderstood psychological report? Not necessarily. This symbolic interpretation does not automatically cancel out the possibility of genuine physical phenomena. Instead, it offers a parallel track of understanding, one that is often more accessible and equally rich. It allows us to appreciate these ancient narratives not as failed science, but as triumphant psychology and profound art. They are humanity's enduring attempt to answer its most fundamental questions. How do we break free from our limitations? How do we connect with something greater than ourselves? How do we visualize the pinnacle of human potential, the image of a human being, serene and empowered, floating above the earth, is one of the most powerful answers we have ever conceived. It is a symbol that speaks directly to the collective unconscious, reminding every generation that our greatest journeys may not be across oceans or into space, but inward toward a state of being where the weight of the world simply falls away. Ultimately, the true test of any historical claim lies in our ability to replicate it. If our ancestors truly possessed the secrets to moving massive stones with sound or mind, can we, with all our advanced science and engineering, achieve the same results today? The answer, so far, is a humbling and definitive no. Modern attempts to recreate the monumental achievements of antiquity, using only the tools we believe they had available, have largely served to highlight the sheer impossibility of the task, rather than proving its feasibility. Consider the ambitious project led by archaeologist Mark Lehner and stonemason Roger Hopkins in the 1990s, documented for a television audience. Their goal was to build a small pyramid, a mere 65 feet tall, using only copper chisels, stone hammers, ropes, and a massive workforce. They quarried the stone, transported it on sleds, and used a large earthen ramp to drag the blocks into place. While they succeeded in creating a recognizable pyramid shape, the experiment revealed profound shortcomings. The structure was significantly smaller and far less precise than even the most modest Egyptian pyramid. The logistics were a nightmare, the wear on their copper tools was immense, and the precision of the stone fitting was crude in comparison to the ancient originals. The project demonstrated that while the basic principles of ramp building and sled pulling work in theory, the practical application on the scale and with the accuracy of the Great Pyramid remains frustratingly out of reach. The gap between what they accomplished and what the ancient Egyptians left behind is not a small step, it is a chasm. In the realm of more esoteric replication, scientists and engineers have turned to the principle of acoustic levitation with fascinating, yet equally limited results. In laboratory settings, the phenomenon is undeniably real and routinely demonstrated. Researchers use powerful speakers and carefully tuned reflectors to create standing sound waves. Within the nodes of these waves, they can trap and suspend small objects. You can watch stunning videos where droplets of water, spheres of styrofoam, or even tiny pieces of metal float completely unsupported in midair, manipulated by nothing but invisible acoustic forces. The applications are genuinely cutting edge, allowing scientists to mix chemicals without contamination or study materials in a state of weightlessness. However, the leap from this laboratory miracle to the legends of ancient construction is where physics draws a firm and unyielding line. The energy required to levitate an object scales exponentially with its size. Lifting a 2-ton stone would require an acoustic intensity so powerful it would not only be deafening, but would likely liquefy the internal organs of any human being standing nearby. The transducers and power sources needed for such a feat are the size of buildings and consume colossal amounts of electricity, a far cry from a group of monks with drums and trumpets. The modern scientific reality underscores a brutal discontinuity. We can levitate a grain of rice with sound, but we are utterly incapable of levitating a stone the size of a car, let alone the 1,000-ton monoliths at Baalbek. This immense challenge has not stopped a few determined individuals from attempting to bridge that gap on a more practical scale. One of the most notable modern figures in this pursuit is a Swedish engineer named Olaf Alexandersson, who in the 1970s published accounts of his experiments with sonic levitation. Inspired by the stories of Henry Kjelsen and Dr. Jarl, Alexandersson built his own apparatus using an assortment of oscillators, amplifiers, and specially designed parabolic sound reflectors. His goal was not to lift a massive block, but to see if he could generate enough force to noticeably affect a smaller, but still substantial, object. In his most successful reported experiment, he claimed to have managed to levitate a small, dense sphere of graphite for a few seconds. While intriguing, his work was never independently verified in a controlled scientific setting, and the details of his setup remain obscure. Like many fringe experiments, it exists in a gray area, a tantalizing anecdote that lacks the rigorous documentation and repeatability required for scientific acceptance. These individual efforts, while passionate, ultimately highlight the same core problem. No one has ever presented a reproducible, demonstrable method for acoustically levitating anything beyond the very small in a way that could even begin to explain ancient megalithic construction. So, where does this leave us? The collective evidence from both mainstream archaeology and fringe science points to the same conclusion. There is a monumental disconnect between what ancient legends describe and what our current understanding of physics and engineering allows us to replicate. The conventional methods, while plausible for smaller structures, buckle under the weight of the evidence at places like Giza, Baalbek, and Sacsayhuaman. The alternative methods, while proven in principle at a microscopic scale, are physically implausible at the monumental scale described in the stories. This leaves us with a profound and enduring mystery. The gap is not one of effort or curiosity. It is a gap in fundamental knowledge. Either our understanding of the capabilities of ancient copper tools and rope is catastrophically incomplete, or our grasp of the potential of forces like sound and consciousness is still in its infancy. The silent, perfect stones of the ancients stand as a permanent challenge, not just to our machines, but to our very paradigm of history and science, daring us to either find the missing piece of the puzzle or finally accept that some secrets were lost so completely that we may never truly comprehend how they were ever accomplished. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of this entire mystery is not whether levitation was real, but why the idea of it remains so incredibly powerful and persistent in the human imagination. These are not just isolated folktales, they form a continuous thread woven through the tapestry of our collective history, appearing in sacred texts, monastic chronicles, and the oral traditions of cultures that had no contact with one another. This widespread recurrence points to something deeper than a simple misunderstanding of physics. It speaks to a fundamental human yearning. The levitation myth endures because it is, at its core, a story about us. It is a testament to our innate drive to push beyond perceived limitations, to imagine a reality where the bonds of the material world are not absolute. When we hear a story about a monk rising in meditation or a massive stone being set in place by song, we are not just hearing about a physical feat. We are witnessing a symbolic representation of humanity's most audacious hope, that through knowledge, discipline, or spiritual purity, we can transcend the very conditions of our existence. These stories function as powerful narrative bridges across the vast gaps in our historical knowledge. When we stand before the Great Pyramid or the walls of Sacsayhuaman, we are faced with a monumental question mark. Our conventional explanations, while logical, often feel insufficient, leaving a lingering sense of awe mixed with confusion. How did they do it? The Levitation narrative steps eloquently into this void. It offers a tantalizing what-if scenario that is far more emotionally satisfying than the incomplete picture provided by ramps and ropes. It transforms these ancient builders from anonymous laborers into master scientists and spiritual adepts, possessors of a lost wisdom that we have yet to rediscover. This doesn't just fill a historical gap, it fills a psychological one. It allows us to re-enchant the world, to see our ancestors not as primitive beings, but as potential peers who may have walked a different, equally valid path to technological and spiritual mastery. The myth comforts us with the idea that nothing is truly impossible, that the boundaries of reality are perhaps more flexible than our modern science has so far been willing to admit. Furthermore, these accounts reflect a profound and enduring sense of awe for the achievements of our ancestors. We look at these structures thousands of years old and we are humbled. The precision, the scale, the sheer ambition of it all defies easy comprehension. In the face of such grandeur, the human mind naturally seeks an explanation that matches the magnificence of the accomplishment. Attributing these wonders to a lost, almost magical science feels more appropriate than attributing them to the slow, grueling work of countless individuals. The Levitation story elevates the achievement to the level of the miraculous, which is often exactly how these monuments feel when we encounter them. It is a form of respect, a way of saying that the work is so extraordinary that it must have required an extraordinary method. This narrative honors the builders by granting them a level of genius that aligns with the breathtaking legacy they left behind. Ultimately, the enduring power of the Levitation myth is a mirror held up to our own potential. It challenges the linear, progressive narrative of history that we often take for granted, the idea that we are always advancing, that our technology is the pinnacle, and that the past was inherently more primitive. What if that's not the whole story? What if human history is not a straight line, but a series of cycles with knowledge being gained, lost, and rediscovered in different forms? The possibility that an ancient civilization might have understood principles of energy and consciousness that we are only now beginning to glimpse with quantum physics and neurology is a deeply provocative thought. It forces us to be humble about our own place in the grand sweep of time. These stories keep that door of possibility open, reminding us that the full scope of human capability is vast and not fully mapped. They inspire us to keep questioning, to keep exploring, and to remain open to the wonder that the world and our own history still has to offer. The myth of levitation, therefore, is far more than a historical curiosity. It is a perpetual invitation to dream bigger and to reconsider what it truly means to be human. So we've gathered a mountain of incredible stories and theories, but now we reach the most critical part of our investigation. We have to stand back from the awe and wonder and put the idea of a lost science of levitation on trial. Is this a genuine, forgotten chapter in human history, or is it a beautiful story we tell ourselves to explain what we can't understand? Let's weigh the evidence, starting with the arguments in favor of the lost science theory. First and most obvious is the physical evidence we can still touch today, the monuments themselves. The colossal stones at Baalbek, the impossibly precise joins at Sacsayhuaman, the sheer mass of the Great Pyramid's construction blocks. These aren't abstract ideas, they are physical realities that sit in the desert and the mountains, challenging us to explain them. The conventional explanations, while logical for smaller projects, strain to the breaking point when applied to these megalithic marvels. The logistical nightmare of moving a 1,000-ton block with log rollers and ropes isn't just difficult, it borders on the physically implausible. The precision achieved in an era without laser levels or computer modeling seems to defy the limits of hand tools. This glaring gap between what was built and the tools we've found to explain it is the single strongest argument that our ancestors might have had a different, perhaps more elegant, method at their disposal. It's not about dismissing their ingenuity, but about questioning whether we have underestimated its form. Next, consider the remarkable consistency of the levitation narrative across the globe. In Tibet, monks use drums and trumpets. In the legends of the pyramids, Arab historians write of papyrus scrolls that make stones light. In South America, stories speak of stones being softened by plants or guided by sound. The builders of Stonehenge and the creators of the ancient Indian Vimanas all have traditions that involve flight and weightlessness. When the same core idea, using non-physical means to overcome gravity, appears in cultures separated by oceans and millennia, with no possible way of communicating with each other, it suggests we are looking at more than just coincidence. This is a powerful pattern. It points toward a fundamental human experience or a recurring discovery, something that different peoples interpreted through their own cultural lenses, but which described the same underlying phenomenon. It's as if humanity kept stumbling upon the same secret, only to forget it again and again, leaving behind only the echo of the story. Adding a layer of modern credibility to these ancient whispers is the fact that we now know the proposed mechanisms are not pure fantasy. Acoustic levitation is a proven scientific fact. We do it in laboratories. The principle of using resonant frequency to affect matter is a cornerstone of physics. While we can't yet scale it to move mountains, its existence validates the core concept that sound can manipulate physical objects. Similarly, our growing understanding of consciousness, group dynamics, and the mind-body connection, while still in its infancy, suggests that the brain's influence over the physical self might have limits we have not yet fully explored. The ancient accounts no longer sound quite as impossible as they did a century ago. They sound like a challenge. They describe a target that modern science can see on the horizon, even if we haven't yet figured out how to reach it. This moves the theory from the realm of pure myth into the space of a tantalizing, though unproven, scientific possibility. However, for all its compelling narrative power, the lost science theory faces a set of devastatingly simple and practical objections. The most glaring is the complete and total absence of physical evidence. If the ancient Egyptians or some precursor civilization had developed a technology sophisticated enough to levitate 80-ton granite blocks, where is the machinery? Where are the tools, the power sources, the instruction manuals carved in stone? We have found their chisels, their hammers, their quarries, and their tombs filled with everyday objects. But we have never found a single artifact that can be identified as an acoustic resonator, an anti-gravity generator, or a device for manipulating magnetic fields. This is an argument from silence, but it is a thunderous one. Advanced technology leaves a trace. It requires infrastructure, maintenance, and training. The complete lack of any such evidence strongly implies that no such technology ever existed. Furthermore, we have a long and well-documented history of humanity's incredible capacity for creating hoaxes and believing in myths. From the spiritualist mediums of the 19th century floating tables with hidden wires to the exaggerated claims of modern psychics, the field of levitation is riddled with deliberate fraud. This history of deception casts a long shadow, making it reasonable to be deeply skeptical of any extraordinary claim. Even without malicious intent, human perception is profoundly fallible. The power of belief, mass hallucination, and the tendency to interpret ambiguous events through a cultural or religious lens can easily transform a metaphorical spiritual experience into a literal account of physical flight. The story of the oracle at Delphi perfectly illustrates this. a real geological phenomenon leading to an altered state that was interpreted as communion with a god. How many other accounts of levitation might be similar misunderstandings of internal psychological states? Finally, and perhaps most convincingly for many, we must not underestimate the sheer power of human labor, ingenuity, and time. The conventional explanations might seem inadequate when we view them through our modern, impatient lens, but we are talking about civilizations that operated on timescales we can barely comprehend. A pharaoh's reign could last for decades. A project like the Great Pyramid might have been the central economic and social focus of the nation for 20 years or more. With tens of thousands of workers, a highly organized social structure, and a limitless supply of time, what seems impossible to us becomes merely a monumental task. Experiments have shown that with enough people, sleds, water, and a massive earthen ramp, you can move and lift enormous stones. It's messy, it's slow, and it's brutally difficult, but it works. The absence of a lost science doesn't diminish the achievement, it reframes it. It suggests that the true miracle was not a secret technology, but the unparalleled social organization, dedication, and collective will of these ancient cultures. Their wonder was not in defying physics, but in harnessing human potential on a scale we have never since matched. The very tools we are developing to peer into the future may, in fact, hold the key to unlocking the secrets of the past. While we've spent our journey looking backward, the resolution to this ancient enigma likely lies ahead, powered by a new generation of technologies that allow us to see through stone, map hidden landscapes, and analyze materials at a molecular level. We are no longer limited to shovels and brushes. We are now equipped with devices that feel like they belong in science fiction, and they are already radically reshaping our understanding of ancient sites. Take LiDAR, for instance, which stands for light detection and ranging. This technology involves mounting a laser scanner on an airplane or drone and flying it over a forest or jungle. The laser pulses penetrate the dense canopy, bouncing off the ground below and returning to create an incredibly detailed, three-dimensional map of the terrain. The dramatic success of LiDAR in places like Cambodia and Guatemala is a perfect preview of what's possible. In the jungles surrounding Angkor Wat, LiDAR revealed a vast, sprawling urban metropolis that was completely invisible from the ground, transforming our understanding of the Khmer Empire from a collection of temples into a massive, sophisticated civilization. Similarly, in Guatemala, it exposed a hidden network of Maya cities, roadways, and fortifications on a scale no one had imagined. Now, imagine applying this same powerful eye to the sands of Egypt around the Giza Plateau, or to the dense rainforests of the Amazon where legends speak of lost cities. We might not find a floating stone, but we could discover the remnants of the infrastructure that made such feats possible. The quarry roads, worker settlements, or even ceremonial centers that hold the missing clues in their foundations. Beyond mapping vast areas from the sky, we have technologies that let us peer directly into the heart of ancient structures without moving a single stone. Ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, is essentially a form of sonar for the Earth. It sends radar pulses into the ground, which bounce back when they encounter a change in density, revealing voids, chambers, tunnels, or even buried artifacts. This technology has already caused major excitement at well-known sites. At the tomb of Tutankhamun, GPR scans have suggested the tantalizing possibility of hidden chambers behind the walls, potentially the long-sought burial place of Queen Nefertiti. While those specific findings remain debated, the principle is sound and constantly improving. Deploying ever more sensitive GPR arrays around the Sphinx or within the Great Pyramid could finally confirm or deny the existence of the legendary Hall of Records. It wouldn't just be finding an empty room. The shape, depth, and contents of any anomaly would provide a digital blueprint, guiding archaeologists to the precise spot to investigate with minimal damage to the monument. This non-invasive approach is crucial, allowing us to be respectful stewards of these ancient wonders while still satisfying our burning curiosity about what lies within. And if we were to find something, the science to understand it has also leaped forward. Advanced material analysis allows us to interrogate stone and metal in ways that would seem like magic to the original builders. Using techniques like X-ray fluorescence and mass spectrometry, we can now determine the exact geological quarry a stone came from, trace the microscopic wear patterns left by specific tools, and even detect residues of organic compounds that have long since vanished to the naked eye. If a legend speaks of a plant extract used to soften stone, we could, in theory, scan the surface of a perfectly fitted block at Sacsayhuamon and find the chemical fingerprint of that very plant. If the builders of Baalbek used some form of lubricant on their sleds to move the 1,000-ton megaton, we might find its hydrocarbon shadow still preserved in the pores of the limestone. This isn't about proving levitation outright. It's about systematically eliminating possibilities and building a forensic-level picture of the actual methods used, potentially revealing a practical, though sophisticated, technology that we have simply failed to recognize. Of course, the ultimate dream for any enthusiast of this mystery is the discovery of a smoking gun, a definitive piece of evidence that settles the debate once and for all. What would that look like? One scenario is the archaeological equivalent of a user manual, an intact papyrus scroll or a set of clay tablets discovered in a sealed, dry tomb. This wouldn't be a religious text or a king's boastful chronicle, but a practical document. Imagine finding detailed engineering diagrams showing the arrangement of musicians around a stone, with annotations about specific frequencies and rhythms. Or perhaps a schematic of a gravity nullifier using spinning disks of specific metals, accompanied by instructions for its assembly and operation. Another breathtaking possibility is the physical discovery of the device itself. What if a future scan of the Great Pyramid reveals a chamber that has been sealed since its construction, not containing gold or a mummy, but a strange crystalline apparatus or a set of perfectly crafted bronze bowls designed to resonate at a specific pitch when struck? Such a find would send shockwaves through the worlds of archaeology, physics, and history, forcing an immediate and total reassessment of our past. Yet, even if we never find a levitation device or a secret manual, the very pursuit of this mystery yields profound benefits. The drive to understand how the ancients built these incredible structures pushes the boundaries of our own science and engineering. Researchers inspired by the acoustic levitation legends are actively working to scale up the technology, not for moving pyramids, but for handling hazardous materials or performing complex manufacturing in midair. The quest to understand the properties of the stones at Baalbek deepens our knowledge of geology and material science. This search at its heart is a powerful engine for innovation. More importantly, it fosters a deeper, more nuanced appreciation for ancient cultures. It forces us to move beyond seeing them as primitive or superstitious and to consider them as intelligent, observant, and brilliantly innovative problem solvers. Whether they used sound, mind, or simply the coordinated power of thousands of determined workers, their achievement commands respect. The enduring mystery of ancient levitation may never be fully solved in the way we hope, but the journey of inquiry itself ensures that we continue to learn, to innovate, and to look upon the works of our ancestors not as dead ruins, but as living puzzles that still have much to teach us about the resilience and ingenuity of the human spirit. And so our journey reaches its end, a grand exploration that has taken us from the silent, sun-scorched stones of the pyramids to the humming, sterile labs of modern science. We have stood in awe before the impossible weight of Baalbek's foundation blocks and marveled at the seamless joins of Sacsayhuamon. We have sifted through the sacred texts of India describing celestial Vimanas, the meticulous church records of levitating saints, and the cryptic manuscripts of alchemists seeking the philosopher's stone. We have even ventured into the shadows of the 20th century, hearing whispers of Nazi experiments and clandestine aerospace projects. It has been an epic quest spanning continents and millennia, all in pursuit of a single, breathtaking idea: that humanity once knew how to defy the most fundamental force that binds us to this earth. The verdict, when viewed through the unyielding lens of contemporary science, is clear. There is no conclusive, verifiable proof that our ancestors possessed a technology capable of full-scale levitation. The laws of physics, as we currently understand them, present a formidable barrier. The energy required to acoustically lift a 30-ton stone is of a magnitude that makes the idea of monks achieving it with drums and trumpets a physical impossibility. The psychological explanations for many of the historical accounts, from the power of mass hallucination and the suggestibility of altered states to the potent symbolism of spiritual ascent, are often compelling and rational. The sheer, awe-inspiring power of coordinated human labor, applied with relentless patience over generations, cannot be underestimated as the most likely engine behind our most ancient wonders. Yet to close the book here would be to ignore the profound, lingering power of the mystery itself. The evidence may not be conclusive, but the question remains powerfully, tantalizingly unresolved. Why does this specific legend, the image of rising, of becoming weightless, of mastering gravity, appear with such startling consistency in every corner of the globe, in cultures that had no conceivable contact with one another? This is not a random folktale, it is a universal human motif, and it is fueled by the undeniable physical reality of the monuments they left behind. We can explain the pyramids with ramps and the walls of Sacsayhuaman with abrasion and time, but when you stand before them, a whisper of doubt remains. The conventional explanations, while logical, often feel insufficient to the grandeur of the achievement. There is a gap, a silent space between what we think we know and what we can actually see and touch, and into that gap flows the enduring legend of a lost science. Perhaps, then, the true meaning of this mystery is not about rewriting physics textbooks, but about understanding something fundamental about ourselves. These stories speak to a deep and abiding human desire to believe that our ancestors were not primitive, but profoundly wise. We long for a past where humanity walked in harmony with nature's hidden laws, where knowledge was not just technical but spiritual, and where the greatest achievements were born from a unity of mind, spirit, and material world. The legend of levitation is a testament to our innate drive to push beyond perceived limits, to imagine a reality where the bonds of our world are not absolute. It is a narrative of hope, suggesting that the full scope of human potential is vaster and more mysterious than our current paradigm allows. This is where the conversation turns to you. After this deep dive into the evidence, the theories, and the philosophies, what is your conclusion? When you look at the Great Pyramid, do you see the pinnacle of human labor and organizational genius, a monument to what we can achieve with time and determination? Or do you see the ghost of a forgotten technology, a silent challenge from our past, hinting that we have lost as much as we have gained? Is the ancient art of levitation a literal science waiting to be rediscovered in some hidden chamber or encoded in a yet untranslated text, a secret that could revolutionize our world once more? Or is it one of humanity's most beautiful and enduring myths, a poetic and powerful metaphor for our eternal quest for freedom, enlightenment, and transcendence? The stones themselves will not speak, so the story must continue with us. Share your thoughts, your theories, and your own sense of wonder in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation alive, and if you're ready for more journeys to the edge of history and mystery, subscribe now so we can continue exploring the unknown together.